The CEO stood in the glass-walled conference room, her silhouette sharp against the city lights, and she was crying. Ethan Brooks had seen Victoria Hale command boardrooms, dismantle competitors, and rebuild entire divisions with a single memo, but he had never seen her break. Not until tonight. Not until she caught him watching. What she whispered changed everything. 5 words that shattered the careful distance between analyst and executive, between loneliness and connection, between the person everyone saw and the woman no one knew. Some boundaries exist for protection. Others exist because we're too afraid to cross them. If you're ready to discover what happens when silence finally speaks, stay with me until the end. And if this story resonates with you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole truth either. Ethan Brooks had learned that lesson in his first week at Meridian Global, and 5 years later, it remained the most valuable thing he knew. Spreadsheets captured revenue and loss, projections and outcomes, the quantifiable skeleton of corporate existence. But the real story, the one that determined whether companies thrived or collapsed, lived in the spaces between the data, in the tension during board meetings, in the careful word choices of internal memos, in the way executives held their coffee cups during difficult conversations, knuckles white against porcelain. Tonight, the office was almost empty, the way Ethan preferred it. The overhead lights had switched to energy-saving mode 2 hours ago, casting everything in a dim half-glow that felt more honest than the aggressive brightness of business hours. His desk sat in a corner of the analyst pool, positioned with a clear view of the executive corridor, not because he'd requested it, but because nobody else wanted the spot. Too exposed. Too easy for senior leadership to notice you working late and pile on additional projects. Ethan didn't mind. He'd built his career on being invisible in plain sight, the analyst who delivered flawless work without requiring management or praise. He preferred the quiet mathematics of financial modeling to the performance art of office politics. While his colleagues networked at happy hours and angled for FaceTime with executives, Ethan refined his algorithms and perfected his forecasts. His work spoke for itself, which meant he rarely had to speak at all. The building's HVAC system hummed its nighttime rhythm, a lower frequency than its daytime roar. Ethan's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency, updating the Q3 revenue model with the latest data from the international divisions. The Tokyo office had exceeded projections again, the 4th consecutive quarter. He made a note to flag it for Jennifer Lai, the VP of Finance, who would want to understand the factors driving consistent outperformance. A soft click echoed from the executive corridor. Ethan's hand stilled on the keyboard. The sound was distinctive, the particular acoustic signature of the Northeast conference room door, the one with the temperamental latch that required an extra push to seal properly. That room had a name among the analyst pool: the aquarium. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls on 3 sides, offering an unobstructed view of whoever occupied it while simultaneously displaying the entire city skyline like a theatrical backdrop. He glanced at his monitor's clock. 9:47 p.m. The executive floor should have been deserted hours ago. Executives didn't work late. They delegated to people like Ethan, who transformed their visions into executable reality while they attended dinners and industry conferences. Curiosity pulled his attention toward the glass corridor. The aquarium's lights were on, warm and bright against the darkness of the surrounding offices. And inside alone stood Victoria Hale. Ethan's breath caught. He'd seen the CEO countless times, of course. Meridian Global wasn't a massive corporation, just under 400 employees, which meant that even mid-level analysts occasionally crossed paths with the woman at the top. He'd sat in town halls where she'd outlined strategic vision with the kind of clarity that made complex market dynamics feel inevitable rather than uncertain. He'd watched her dismantle a hostile acquisition attempt during a shareholder meeting with such surgical precision that the aggressor's stock had dropped 12% before trading closed. Victoria Hale was 41 years old and had held the CEO position for 18 months, the youngest person and second woman to lead Meridian Global in its 37-year history. She'd been promoted from Chief Operating Officer after her predecessor's abrupt retirement, a transition that had sparked speculation throughout the industry. Some called it a coronation. Others whispered about a coup. Ethan had analyzed her first year's performance data with the same detached rigor he applied to every dataset. The results were undeniable. Revenue up 19%, operational costs down 7%, employee retention improved across all divisions except one. The numbers painted a portrait of exceptional leadership. But numbers didn't capture the woman standing alone in the aquarium at nearly 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. She stood with her back to the corridor, facing the expanse of windows that overlooked the city. From Ethan's angle, he could see her reflection in the glass, a ghost image superimposed over the glittering matrix of lights below. Her posture was different from the commanding stance she maintained during business hours. Smaller, somehow. More human. She'd removed her suit jacket. Her white blouse was untucked on one side, and her hair, usually secured in a flawless twist, had begun to escape its pins, dark strands falling against her neck. One hand rested against the glass, fingers spread wide as if seeking connection with something beyond her reach. Ethan knew he should look away. This was a private moment, the kind of vulnerable solitude that people sought when they believed themselves unobserved. The ethical response was to return his attention to his revenue model and pretend he'd seen nothing. He didn't look away. Perhaps it was the oddness of the hour, the way late night seemed to exist outside normal rules. Perhaps it was the unexpected humanity of seeing Victoria Hale as something other than the polished executive who dominated every room she entered. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition of familiar loneliness, the particular isolation that came from being competent enough that people forgot you might also need something beyond efficiency and results. Victoria's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. Then, in the ghostly reflection, Ethan saw her hand move to her face. The gesture was small, almost furtive, the quick brush of fingertips against her eyes that meant only one thing. She was crying. The realization sent a jolt through Ethan's chest, equal parts shock and something uncomfortably close to voyeuristic guilt. This was Victoria Hale, the woman who'd once continued presenting quarterly results without missing a beat when a board member had suffered a medical emergency mid-meeting, who'd negotiated a merger worth $200 million, while the opposing CEO had actively attempted to undermine her credibility with gendered dismissals and patronizing interruptions. Victoria Hale didn't cry. Couldn't cry. Wasn't supposed to be capable of the kind of raw emotion Ethan was witnessing through 2 panes of glass and 60 feet of corporate corridor. He should close his laptop, pack his bag, leave through the south exit, which would allow him to avoid the executive floor entirely. This moment wasn't meant for him. Instead, he stood. The decision happened before conscious thought could intervene, his body responding to an impulse that bypassed his usually reliable logic. His chair rolled backward with a soft sound that seemed thunderous in the quiet office. His feet carried him toward the corridor, each step measured and deliberate, giving him ample opportunity to reconsider. He didn't reconsider. The executive corridor's carpet was thicker than the analyst floor's industrial-grade covering, each footfall muffled and silent. The walls here featured abstract art that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary, along with photographs of Meridian Global's various offices around the world: Tokyo, London, Sao Paulo, Sydney, physical evidence of the company's reach, its importance, its place in the global economy. The aquarium's glass walls grew larger in his vision. Victoria remained motionless, still facing the windows, still lost in whatever private grief had claimed her. Ethan could see details now that distance had obscured: the slight tremble in her shoulders, the way her free hand had curled into a fist against her thigh, the rigid set of her spine that suggested she was fighting for composure with every breath. He stopped outside the conference room door, his hand hovering over the handle. This was the moment of decision, the final opportunity to retreat to safety and pretend this encounter had never happened. The door's latch clicked as he pushed it open. Victoria's head snapped around, her body pivoting with the swift alertness of someone caught in an unguarded moment. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the conference room's polished table, analyst and CEO, both frozen in the shock of unexpected contact. Up close, the evidence of her tears was unmistakable. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and moisture tracked down her cheeks despite her obvious attempt to compose herself. But what struck Ethan most intensely was her expression, not anger at the intrusion, not embarrassment at being seen in a vulnerable state, but something closer to relief. as if she'd been drowning in silence and his presence, however unwelcome, at least proved she hadn't disappeared entirely. "Mr. Brooks?" Her voice was steady, impressively controlled given the circumstances. She knew his name. Of course she did. Victoria Hale knew everyone's name. It was one of the things that made her exceptional. "Working late, I see." It wasn't a question, which meant it didn't require an answer. Ethan recognized the deflection for what it was, an attempt to transform this encounter into something normal, a routine interaction between executive and employee that could be filed away and forgotten. He could help her with that deflection. Should help her. The professional response was to apologize for the interruption, offer some bland comment about quarterly deadlines, and exit as quickly as possible. "Are you all right?" The words emerged before he could stop them, quiet but unmistakable in the room's silence. Victoria's composure cracked, just for a moment, just long enough for Ethan to see the woman beneath the title. Her hand rose toward her face again, then stopped mid-gesture, as if she'd suddenly remembered she wasn't alone. She turned back toward the windows, presenting him with her profile. "I'm fine." The lie was so transparent it felt almost insulting to both of them. "Just a long day, long week, really." Ethan should accept the lie. He'd been given an exit, wrapped in corporate courtesy and mutual pretense. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to nod, wish her a good evening, and leave. Instead, he stepped farther into the room, letting the door close behind him with that distinctive click. "You're not fine." The observation hung in the air between them, bold and reckless. Ethan felt his heart hammering against his ribs, some distant part of his mind cataloging this moment as potentially career-ending. You didn't contradict the CEO. You didn't point out her vulnerabilities. You definitely didn't walk uninvited into her private moment of breakdown and announce that you could see through her defenses. Victoria's laugh was soft, bitter, utterly devoid of humor. "No," she said, still facing the windows. "I'm not." The admission seemed to cost her something. Her hand returned to the glass, and Ethan noticed that her fingers were trembling. Not much, just enough to create tiny vibrations in the reflection of city lights on her skin. "This job," she said quietly, "requires you to be certain, confident, right. The board doesn't want to hear about doubts or fears or the very human concern that you might be making decisions that will affect hundreds of lives, and you might be wrong. They want vision and strength and unwavering conviction." She paused, and when she continued, her voice had dropped even lower, as if she were speaking more to herself than to him. "But what happens when you're not certain? What happens when you lie awake at night running scenarios, questioning every choice, wondering if the confidence everyone relies on is just an elaborate performance?" Ethan moved closer, stopping a few feet behind her, close enough to see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Then you're human," he said, "like everyone else." CEOs aren't allowed to be human. Victoria's reflection met his eyes in the glass. "We're supposed to be something more, something better. Infallible decision-makers who never doubt, never break, never stand alone in empty conference rooms crying because we're so tired of pretending." The rawness in her voice caught Ethan completely off guard. This wasn't the polished executive he'd observed from a distance for 5 years. This was someone drowning in expectations, suffocating under the weight of a role that demanded perfection while offering only isolation. "Everyone gets tired," Ethan heard himself say. "Even you." Victoria turned to face him fully, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, she really looked at him. Not the cursory executive glance that cataloged name and position before moving on, but genuine attention, the kind that saw him as a complete person rather than a job title. "Ethan Brooks," she said, and something in the way she spoke his name made it sound less like an identification and more like a discovery. 5 years with Meridian Global, top-tier analyst. Your revenue forecasts have been accurate to within 3% for the last 7 quarters. Jennifer Lai says you're the best financial modeler she's ever worked with, and that you're wasted in the analyst pool. Heat crept up Ethan's neck. He'd known Victoria was aware of him in the abstract sense that CEOs knew about high-performing employees, but this level of specific detail suggested something more deliberate. She'd been paying attention. "You're also quiet," Victoria continued. "Not in the way of someone who has nothing to say, but in the way of someone who prefers to listen. You work late most nights, usually alone. You declined the last two invitations to analyst social events. She paused, her eyes searching his face. You understand isolation, don't you? The question was almost intimate, the kind of observation that required acknowledging truths people usually kept carefully hidden. Ethan could deflect. He was good at deflection. It was how he'd survived 5 years in a corporate environment without forming the kind of relationships that led to complicated entanglements. But something about this moment, about Victoria's tear-stained face and exhausted honesty, about the late hour and empty building, about two people who'd both chosen solitude and were now facing the cost of that choice, made deflection feel like cowardice. Yes, he said simply. I understand. Victoria's expression shifted, some of the tension leaving her features. Do you know what the hardest part is? Not the decisions or the pressure or even the loneliness. It's the performance. Every interaction is a test. Every conversation is theater. I can never just be. Just exist without calculation or strategy or concern about how every word, every gesture, every moment of weakness will be interpreted and weaponized. She moved away from the windows, walking to the conference table and bracing both hands against its edge. Her head dropped forward, and Ethan could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. I'm so tired of performing, she whispered. So tired of being Victoria Hale, CEO. Sometimes I just want to be Victoria. Just Victoria. The vulnerability in her voice did something to Ethan's carefully constructed defenses. He'd spent 5 years maintaining professional distance, treating human connection as a distraction from the clean logic of numbers and analysis. But watching Victoria Hale, brilliant, powerful, utterly overwhelmed Victoria, struggle to bear the weight of expectations alone, he felt something crack in his chest. Then be Victoria, he said. Right now, in this room. No performance, no strategy, just truth. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. Truth? Truth. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the building's ambient sounds, the HVAC's hum, the distant ping of an elevator, the whisper of city noise filtering through layers of glass and steel. Victoria seemed to be weighing something, considering an option that simultaneously terrified and tempted her. The truth, she said finally, is that I'm terrified. Daniel Cross is positioning himself to challenge my leadership. The board has concerns about the direction I'm taking the company. There are rumors. She stopped, pain flashing across her face. There are always rumors. About my past. About how I got this position. About who I really am beneath the title. What kind of rumors? Victoria's laugh was sharp, defensive. The kind that follow women in leadership. That I slept my way to the top. That I'm not actually competent, just well-connected. That my predecessor retired because I manufactured a crisis that made him look weak. She pushed away from the table, pacing toward the windows again. None of it's true, but truth doesn't matter when the narrative is more interesting than reality. Ethan had heard whispers in the analyst pool, vague insinuations about Victoria's rapid rise, speculation about relationships and favors and backroom deals. He dismissed them as the bitter noise of people who couldn't comprehend that a woman might simply be exceptional at her job. But he hadn't realized how deeply those rumors had penetrated, or how much damage they were doing to someone who already carried too much weight. What actually happened? He asked. With your predecessor? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan wondered if he'd pushed too far. Then she spoke, her voice carrying a mixture of anger and grief that suggested old wounds not fully healed. Robert Morrison was a brilliant CEO for 15 years, but toward the end he started making mistakes. Small ones at first. Missed opportunities, questionable acquisitions, resistance to necessary changes. As COO, I tried to help. I brought him data, proposed strategies, offered to take on additional responsibilities. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection. He didn't want help. He wanted loyalty in silence. When I couldn't give him blind loyalty at the expense of the company, he tried to fire me. But he's the one who left. The board intervened. They'd seen the same problems I had, watched his performance declining for 2 years. When he forced them to choose between us, they chose the future over the past. Victoria's voice dropped. Robert was furious. On his way out, he planted seeds, suggestions that I'd been manipulating the board, that I'd sabotaged his decisions to make myself look better, that I'd engineered his downfall instead of simply surviving it. And people believed him. Enough people. Enough to create doubt. Enough to make my authority feel conditional rather than earned. She turned back to face Ethan, and her expression was raw with exhaustion. Do you know what it's like to work twice as hard as everyone else? To be twice as good and still have people assume you cheated somehow? That success couldn't possibly be legitimate? Ethan thought about his own careful invisibility, the way he'd learned early that being overlooked was safer than being noticed. Different challenges, perhaps, but he understood the fundamental unfairness she was describing, the extra burden that some people carried simply because of who they were. It's not fair, he said quietly. No. Victoria's smile was sad, knowing. It's not, but fair is a child's concept. Adults deal with what is, not what should be. What is, Ethan said, is that you're an exceptional CEO who's being undermined by people threatened by your competence. Thank you for the vote of confidence, but I'm not sure it's that simple. Daniel Cross isn't just threatened. He's smart and strategic and very good at identifying weaknesses. She moved back to the conference table, pulling out a chair and sinking into it as if her legs could no longer support her weight. He's been collecting ammunition, building alliances, waiting for the right moment to strike. What kind of ammunition? Victoria hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. My divorce. It was finalized 14 months ago, right before I became CEO. Daniel's been suggesting that the stress of the separation affected my judgment, that I'm emotionally compromised. He's also questioning some of my recent decisions, the Singapore expansion, the restructuring of the European division, valid business disagreements framed as evidence of instability. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, crossing the invisible line that separated executive and employee. Are you unstable? The directness of the question seemed to surprise her. No, I'm exhausted and overwhelmed and carrying more weight than any one person should have to bear alone. But I'm not unstable. My decisions are sound. The data supports every major initiative I've launched. Her voice strengthened with conviction. I'm good at this job. I'm exactly what Meridian Global needs right now. Then why are you sitting here crying in the dark? The bluntness of his words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation. Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan watched emotions flicker across her face. Anger, surprise, something that might have been gratitude. Because being right doesn't make it easier, she said finally. Because I can be confident in every business decision and still feel completely lost about this. She gestured vaguely at herself, at the room, at the space between them. The human parts, the parts that need connection and understanding, and someone who sees you as more than a title or a problem to be solved. I see you. The words emerged before Ethan could consider their weight, quiet but absolute. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, and he realized what he'd just admitted. Not just that he saw her in this moment, but that he'd been seeing her all along. Through glass walls and across office corridors, in quarterly presentations and strategic meetings, in all the small moments when she didn't know she was being observed. I see you, he repeated, committing fully now. I've been seeing you for a long time. Victoria's breath caught audibly. Ethan. You asked for truth, he interrupted, his heart hammering so hard he was certain she could hear it. Here's mine. I watch you. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, heat flooding his face. But I notice things. The way you take your coffee black in the morning but switch to tea by afternoon. How you touch your left earring when you're considering a difficult decision. That you laugh differently in small groups than in large meetings. More genuine when there are fewer people watching. He stood, suddenly needing to move to channel the nervous energy flooding his system. I notice that you're kind to the cleaning staff and remember their kids' names. That you stayed late 3 nights last month to personally review analyst reports because you wanted to understand our work, not just receive summaries. That you cry alone in conference rooms because you don't have anyone to cry with. Victoria rose to her feet and Ethan couldn't read her expression. Somewhere between shocked and something else he didn't dare name. I'm sorry, he said quickly. That was inappropriate. I should go. Stop. Her voice was firm but not angry. She moved around the table, closing the distance between them until they stood only a few feet apart. Don't apologize for seeing me. Do you know how rare that is? How invisible you become when everyone's looking at your title instead of your face? Ethan's throat felt tight. I know something about being invisible. Yes. Victoria's eyes searched his face with an intensity that made him feel simultaneously exposed and understood. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The CEO nobody really sees and the analyst nobody really notices. I make it a point not to be noticed. Why? The question was simple, but the answer was complicated, tangled up in a childhood spent learning that standing out meant becoming a target, that safety lived in the shadows, that excellence was best practiced quietly. Ethan had spent 29 years perfecting the art of capable invisibility, and he wasn't sure he had the words to explain it to someone who'd been forced into the spotlight. But Victoria was still looking at him with that searching intensity, and he found himself wanting to try. Because when people notice you, they expect things, he said slowly. They want you to perform, to entertain, to fill some role they've created. And if you can't or won't, you become a disappointment. It's easier to just not be seen in the first place. Understanding flickered across Victoria's face. So you chose invisibility, and I had visibility thrust upon me whether I wanted it or not. Different problems. Same loneliness. She said it softly, an observation rather than an accusation. We're both hiding, Ethan. You in plain sight, me behind a title. Both of us terrified of what might happen if we stopped performing long enough to just exist. The truth of her words settled into Ethan's chest like a weight and a relief simultaneously. He'd never articulated it quite that way, but yes, that was exactly what he'd been doing. Performing invisibility with the same dedication Victoria performed confidence. What would happen? He asked quietly. If we stopped? Victoria's expression shifted, vulnerability and possibility warring across her features. She took another step closer, and now they were definitely inside each other's personal space, close enough that Ethan could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that probably had a French name he couldn't pronounce. I don't know, she admitted. I've been performing for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to just be. But standing here, talking to you. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. This is the most real I've felt in months, maybe years. Ethan's heart was doing complicated things in his chest, and somewhere in the back of his mind, warning bells were screaming about professional boundaries and power dynamics and the 1,000 ways this could end badly. But those warnings felt distant compared to the immediate reality of Victoria standing close enough to touch, looking at him like he was something more than just another employee. We shouldn't, he said, even as every cell in his body urged him forward. No, Victoria agreed, we absolutely shouldn't. Neither of them moved away. The moment stretched, tension building like a physical force between them. Ethan was acutely aware of every detail, the rise and fall of Victoria's breathing, the pulse visible in her throat, the way the conference room lights caught the highlights in her dark hair. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat expanding to fill the space between seconds. Then Victoria's hand rose, and her fingers brushed against his cheek in a touch so light it might have been imaginary. Except it wasn't. Her skin was warm, her touch tentative but deliberate, and the contact sent electricity racing down Ethan's spine. What are we doing? She asked, her voice rough with emotion. Ethan didn't have a good answer. This was reckless and complicated and potentially catastrophic for both their careers. But it was also the first authentic moment he'd experienced in longer than he could remember, and the thought of retreating back into safe invisibility felt like choosing slow suffocation. Something stupid, he said. Probably. Victoria's laugh was soft, surprised. Definitely stupid. We could stop. We could. She didn't move her hand from his face. We should. Yes. But we're not going to, are we? Ethan knew the smart answer. He'd built his entire adult life on making smart, calculated decisions that prioritized safety and stability. This was neither smart nor safe. This was the opposite of everything he'd carefully constructed, messy and impulsive and utterly terrifying. "No," he said, making a choice that would change everything. "I don't think we are." Victoria's eyes held his for one more suspended moment. Then, with infinite slowness, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. Not a kiss, something more intimate than that. A gesture of connection that acknowledged the impossibility of what they were feeling, while simultaneously refusing to deny it. "I don't do this," she whispered against his skin. "I don't let people in. I don't trust easily, and I definitely don't get involved with employees. I don't do this either. Any of this. So what are we doing, Ethan?" He lifted his own hand, mirroring her gesture, his fingers trembling slightly as they found her cheek. "I have no idea. But for the first time in years, I don't care that I don't have a plan." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, surrendering to gravity, and trusting that something would catch him. Victoria's breath hitched, and when she pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, what he saw in her expression made his chest ache, hope and fear and desperate, fragile possibility. "This could destroy both of us," she said. "I know. People will assume the worst, the rumors will be vicious. I know that too. And Daniel will use this as ammunition. He'll frame me as unprofessional, you as opportunistic. The board will question my judgment." Ethan understood what she was doing, cataloging risks, building the case for retreat. It was the executive in her, the strategist who analyzed every angle before committing, but he could also see the woman beneath that armor, the one who was tired of being alone, who wanted connection badly enough to risk everything. "So we stop now," he said, giving her the out she needed. "We forget this conversation. Tomorrow morning, we're back to CEO and analyst, proper distance and professional boundaries. No one ever has to know." Victoria's hand was still against his face, her touch steady despite everything she was saying about the danger they faced. "Is that what you want?" The question felt impossibly important, weighted with implications that extended far beyond this moment. What Ethan wanted had never been particularly relevant. He'd learned early to prioritize survival over desire, safety over satisfaction. But standing here with Victoria Hale looking at him like he mattered, like what he wanted actually counted for something, he found the truth rising to the surface whether he wanted it to or not. "No," he said, the word emerging rough and honest. "No, that's not what I want at all." Something in Victoria's expression cracked open. Relief? Or surrender? Or maybe both. "Good," she whispered. "Because I don't want that either." And then she was kissing him. It wasn't what Ethan had expected, not tentative or questioning, but certain and complete. Victoria's mouth finding his with the same confidence she brought to everything else. Her hand slid from his cheek to the back of his neck, fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. His own hands moved to her waist, and he felt the rapid beat of her heart against his chest, proof that underneath all that executive armor, she was as terrified and exhilarated as he was. The kiss deepened, and Ethan forgot about spreadsheets and revenue models, about professional boundaries and career consequences. There was only this. Victoria's body pressed against his, her mouth moving against his with increasing urgency, the soft sound she made when his hands tightened on her waist. Every nerve ending in his body felt electrified, awakened after years of careful numbness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria's carefully composed executive appearance had completely unraveled. Her hair had fallen fully loose around her shoulders, her lipstick was smudged, and her eyes held a wild, almost disbelieving light. "Oh, God," she said, her voice shaking. "We really did that." Ethan couldn't help laughing, slightly dizzy with adrenaline and disbelief. "We really did. This is insane." But Victoria was smiling, not her professional smile, but something genuine and bright, and maybe a little bit reckless. Completely, utterly insane. "Yes. People are going to find out. You know that, right? Secrets don't stay secret in corporate environments. Someone will notice. Someone always notices." Ethan thought about the analyst pool's gossip network, the way information traveled through the company faster than official memos. She was right. This wouldn't stay hidden. The question was whether they cared enough to stop before it started. "Let them notice," he he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. I'm tired of hiding. Victoria's eyes widened. Ethan, I'm not saying we take out a billboard, he clarified quickly, but I'm also not going to pretend this didn't happen, that you don't matter. He reached up, tucking a strand of loose hair behind her ear. I've spent 5 years being invisible by choice. I don't want to be invisible to you. Something in Victoria's expression softened, the executive armor falling away completely to reveal the woman underneath, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified in equal measure. You're not, she said quietly. You haven't been for a long time. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. How long had she been noticing him the way he'd been noticing her? How many moments had passed where they'd been seeing each other across the distance of corporate hierarchy, neither quite brave enough to cross the gap? Until tonight. Until Victoria had broken down in an empty conference room and Ethan had chosen connection over safety. What happens now? Victoria asked, and Ethan could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The CEO who always had a plan suddenly navigating without a map. I don't know, he admitted. I've never done this before. Neither have I. Not like this. She glanced at her watch and winced. It's almost 11. We should probably go home, Ethan finished. Sleep. Figure out what we're doing when we're not running on exhaustion and adrenaline. Victoria nodded, but neither of them moved. It was as if breaking this moment meant acknowledging the complications that waited outside the aquarium's glass walls. The whispers and judgment, the power dynamics and professional risks, the weight of expectations and consequences. Finally, Victoria stepped back, putting necessary distance between them even as her eyes remained locked on his. Tomorrow, she said, and it sounded like both a promise and a question. Tomorrow, Ethan confirmed. She gathered her jacket from the back of a chair, smoothing her hair and wiping at her smudged makeup with careful fingers. The transformation was subtle but definitive, Victoria becoming Victoria Hale again, the CEO reasserting herself over the woman. But when she looked at Ethan one more time before leaving, he saw both versions in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me, for not running away. Thank you for letting me stay. She smiled, that genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her entire face, and then she was gone, the conference room door clicking shut behind her. Ethan stood alone in the aquarium, his reflection superimposed over the city lights, and tried to process what had just happened. He'd kissed Victoria Hale. More than that, he'd connected with her, seen her vulnerability, and offered his own in return, crossed every professional boundary that should have kept them safely separate. And he didn't regret it, not even a little. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like waking up, as if he'd been sleepwalking through his own life and had suddenly opened his eyes to find himself standing somewhere completely unexpected. Ethan walked back to his desk in a daze, the building's nighttime silence pressing in around him. His revenue model still waited on his screen, numbers and projections exactly as he'd left them. But they looked different now. Less like the only things that mattered and more like background noise to something infinitely more complicated and real. He saved his work, shut down his computer, and gathered his things. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished doors. He looked the same as always, same quiet analyst, same unremarkable features, same careful neutrality. But underneath, everything had changed. Tomorrow, they'd have to figure out what they were doing. Tomorrow, consequences would start manifesting. Tomorrow, the real complications would begin. But tonight, just for tonight, Ethan allowed himself to feel something other than carefully controlled numbness. Hope, possibility. The terrifying, exhilarating sense that life could be more than spreadsheets and silence. He drove home through empty streets, the city's lights reflecting off his windshield like captured stars. When he finally climbed into bed just after midnight, sleep came surprisingly easily, his mind quieter than it had been in years. And if he dreamed of brown eyes and genuine smiles, of glass walls shattering and careful distance collapsing, of a whispered tomorrow that held more weight than any quarterly forecast, well, that was nobody's business but his own, at least for now. Morning arrived with the subtle cruelty of sunlight through inadequate curtains, dragging Ethan from sleep at 6:30 despite his body's protests. He'd managed perhaps 5 hours of rest, his mind too active to fully surrender to unconsciousness. Every time he'd started to drift, memory would surface. Victoria's hand on his face, the taste of her lipstick, the way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth seeing. He showered in water hot enough to sting, dressed in his usual work uniform of pressed shirt and conservative tie, and tried to convince himself that last night had actually happened. In the harsh practicality of Friday morning, with traffic reports droning from his phone and coffee brewing in his ancient machine, the entire encounter felt surreal. Had he really walked into the aquarium? Had Victoria Hale actually kissed him in an empty conference room while the city glittered below? The evidence sat on his bathroom counter, a slight bruise on his lower lip where their kiss had turned urgent, physical proof that contradicted the dreamlike quality of his memories. Ethan touched it gently, wincing at the tenderness, and felt something warm unfurl in his chest. It had happened, all of it. The drive to Meridian Global took 40 minutes through morning congestion, giving Ethan plenty of time to spiral through increasingly anxious scenarios. What would he say when he saw Victoria? How were they supposed to act around each other? Last night's intimacy had felt inevitable in the moment, but daylight brought questions neither of them had answered. Were they dating now? Was this a relationship or a mistake? Did executives and analysts even attempt to navigate romantic connections, or was that simply too complicated to work? He parked in his usual spot on the third level of the garage and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow his racing heart. Whatever happened today, he couldn't let it show on his face. The analyst pool had gossip sensors calibrated to detect the slightest irregularity, a strange expression, unusual behavior. Any deviation from established patterns would trigger speculation. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt longer than usual, each floor ding marking his progression toward whatever waited above. When the doors opened onto the analyst pool, everything looked exactly as it always did. Same industrial carpet, same cubicle configuration, same low murmur of morning conversations as people settled into their workstations with coffee and resignation. Marcus Chen glanced up from his desk as Ethan passed, offering a distracted wave. "Morning, Brooks. You're in early." Ethan checked his watch, 7:43, which was actually late by his standards. "Traffic was light." "Lucky you. I got stuck behind an accident on the connector." Marcus returned his attention to his monitor, already absorbed in whatever model he was building. The normalcy was almost disorienting. Ethan had half expected to walk in and find the entire office somehow aware of what had happened, as if the night's events had been broadcast across some invisible network. But nobody stared. Nobody whispered. Life at Meridian Global continued its usual rhythm, utterly unchanged by the fact that Ethan's entire world had shifted on its axis. He booted up his computer and opened his email, scanning through the overnight accumulation. Most were routine: automated reports, meeting confirmations, a reminder about the upcoming town hall. But one message, received at 6:15 that morning, made his breath catch. The sender was Victoria Hale. The subject line read simply, Q3 analysis. Ethan's finger hovered over the mouse, heart hammering. This could be purely professional, Victoria requesting his work on the quarterly analysis he'd been developing. Or it could be something else entirely, a coded message that meant something beyond its corporate language. He clicked. "Mr. Brooks, I've reviewed your preliminary Q3 revenue analysis and would like to discuss your methodology in detail. Please schedule 30 minutes on my calendar at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Victoria Hale." Ethan read it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning in the formal prose. The tone was perfectly professional, appropriate for a CEO requesting clarification from an analyst. But the timing, sent at 6:15 on a Friday morning, hours before normal business communication, suggested something more intentional. Victoria had been awake early, thinking about him, finding a legitimate excuse to request a meeting, or maybe he was reading too much into it. Maybe she genuinely wanted to discuss his analysis, and the early send time simply reflected her notorious work habits. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "It's Victoria. I got your number from HR directory." Last night wasn't a dream, was it? Relief flooded through Ethan's chest so intensely it was almost painful. She was thinking about it too, questioning the reality of what had happened, reaching out despite all the professional reasons not to. He typed quickly before anxiety could stop him. "Not a dream. I have a bruised lip to prove it." The response came within seconds. I'm sorry, I got carried away. Don't apologize, I'm not complaining. A longer pause this time, and Ethan could imagine Victoria sitting in her office, carefully considering her next words. When the message finally arrived, it made his pulse quicken. We need to talk, really talk, about what this means and what we're doing. Agreed. Your office? Too visible. People notice who goes in and out. Can you meet me for lunch, off campus? Ethan glanced at his calendar. He had a team meeting at 11, but his afternoon was clear. Yes, where? There's a small Italian place on Market Street, Giovanni's. 1 o'clock? I'll be there. Ethan, thank you for last night, for not making me feel crazy for wanting this. He stared at the message, throat tight with emotion he didn't quite know how to name. You're not crazy, neither am I. We'll figure it out. 1 o'clock, Victoria confirmed, and then the conversation ended, leaving Ethan alone with his racing thoughts and the surreal reality that he had just made lunch plans with the CEO via text message. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan forced himself through his usual work, updating models, responding to emails, preparing analysis for the finance team's weekly review. But his mind kept drifting to Victoria, to the upcoming lunch meeting, to the 1,000 questions that needed answering. At 10:30, Jennifer Lai appeared at his desk, her expression professionally pleasant, but her eyes sharp with curiosity. Ethan, do you have a minute? His stomach clenched. Jennifer was his direct supervisor, the VP of Finance, who'd praised his work to Victoria. If anyone in the analyst pool would notice unusual behavior, it would be her. Of course. He followed her to one of the small conference rooms that ringed the perimeter of the analyst floor, trying to keep his expression neutral. Jennifer closed the door and leaned against the table, arms crossed. She was in her mid-40s, brilliant with numbers, and notoriously difficult to fool. I got an interesting email this morning from Victoria Hale. Ethan's heart stopped. Oh? She wants to meet with you directly about your Q3 analysis. Jennifer's tone was carefully neutral, but Ethan could see the question in her eyes. That's unusual. Normally, CEO requests for analyst work would come through me first. I'm not sure why she reached out directly, Ethan said, which was technically true. He didn't know Victoria's strategic reasoning for the email, even if he understood the personal motivation behind it. Jennifer studied him for a long moment. Ethan, I'm going to be direct with you because I like you and because you do excellent work. When executives start taking special interest in individual analysts, it raises questions. Good questions sometimes, but also potentially complicated ones. I understand. Do you? Jennifer's voice was kind but firm. Because from where I'm sitting, I see a talented analyst who keeps his head down and does exceptional work without seeking attention. And suddenly our CEO is personally requesting meetings with you. That's going to get noticed. Ethan felt heat creeping up his neck. My work hasn't changed. I'm still producing the same quality analysis I always have. I know that, but perception matters in corporate environments, especially when it comes to relationships between executives and employees. She paused, and when she continued, her tone had softened slightly. Look, I don't know what's going on, and maybe I'm completely off base here, but if there's something developing that could affect your professional reputation, you need to be smart about it. The warning was clear, delivered with enough plausible deniability that Jennifer could claim she'd simply been offering general career advice. But Ethan heard the real message. People were already starting to notice something unusual about his connection to Victoria, and they would be watching. I appreciate the advice, he said carefully. My focus remains on producing quality work for the finance team. Jennifer nodded, apparently satisfied with the diplomatic non-answer. Good. Because you have a real future here, Ethan. I'd hate to see anything compromise that. She headed toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Daniel Cross has been asking questions about the analyst pool. Who's working on what projects? Who has special skills or knowledge? Be careful around him. The mention of Victoria's rival sent a chill down Ethan's spine. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he's looking for leverage. Daniel doesn't do anything without strategic purpose. Jennifer's expression was troubled. Just watch yourself, okay? And if he approaches you directly, you might want to give me a heads up. After Jennifer left, Ethan sat in the conference room for several minutes, trying to process the conversation. Less than 12 hours had passed since he'd kissed Victoria, and already the corporate machinery was beginning to take notice. Jennifer's warning had been friendly, but it highlighted a harsh reality. Whatever was developing between him and Victoria would not stay private. People would notice, speculate, and potentially weaponize any perceived irregularity. And Daniel Cross was apparently already hunting for ammunition. Ethan returned to his desk, hyper-aware of his surroundings in a way he'd never been before. Were people watching him? Had the quality of ambient conversation shifted when he walked past? He forced himself to focus on his monitor, pulling up the revenue analysis he'd been developing, but concentration felt impossible. At 11, he attended the team meeting with the other senior analysts, a weekly gathering where they reviewed ongoing projects and coordinated deliverables. Marcus was there, along with Priya Sharma and David Chen, the core group that handled Meridian Global's most complex financial modeling. The conversation was routine: budget updates, timeline adjustments, resource allocation. But Ethan found himself analyzing every word, every glance, searching for signs that someone suspected something. Priya caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "You okay, Brooks? You seem distracted." "Fine," he said quickly. "Just thinking about the Q3 variances." "Aren't we all?" David muttered, earning sympathetic laughs from the group. The meeting ended at noon, leaving Ethan with an hour to kill before his lunch with Victoria. He considered working, but his mind was too scattered for meaningful analysis. Instead, he found himself walking to the building's observation deck on the 20th floor, a small outdoor space that employees rarely used. The city spread out below him, all glass and steel and purposeful movement. Somewhere in this building, Victoria was preparing for the same lunch meeting, probably wrestling with the same anxieties and questions. The thought made him feel less alone, connected to someone else navigating the same impossible situation. His phone buzzed. Another text from Victoria. "Nervous." Ethan smiled despite everything. "Me too." "Good. Means we're both sane enough to recognize this is terrifying. Is that what sane people do? Walk directly into terrifying situations?" "No, but maybe we're not entirely sane. Maybe that's okay." Ethan pocketed his phone and headed back inside. At 12:45, he left Meridian Global through the south exit, hoping to avoid running into anyone who might question where he was going. The walk to Giovanni's took 15 minutes, leading him through crowded sidewalks full of the lunch hour rush. The restaurant was small and tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore, the kind of place that survived on neighborhood loyalty rather than tourist traffic. Ethan pushed through the door into a dim interior that smelled like garlic and fresh bread. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, and perhaps a dozen tables filled the narrow space. Victoria sat in a corner booth, partially obscured by a decorative screen. She'd changed from whatever she'd worn to the office, now dressed in dark jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. The casual clothing made her look younger, more accessible, less like the intimidating executive he'd observed from a distance. She stood as he approached, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the reality of daylight contact somehow more intense than last night's darkness. "Hi," Victoria said softly. "Hi." They sat, and an older waiter appeared almost immediately with menus and water. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water for me," Victoria said. "Same," Ethan added. The waiter departed, leaving them in awkward silence. Now that they were here, face to face with the explicit purpose of discussing what was happening between them, Ethan had no idea where to begin. Victoria solved the problem by laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that made her cover her mouth with her hand. "This is so strange. I've run board meetings with hostile investors, negotiated million-dollar contracts, fired senior executives. But sitting here with you, I feel like a teenager on a first date." "Is this a date?" "I don't know. Is it?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice, even though the nearest occupied table was too far away to overhear. "What is this, Ethan? What are we doing?" He appreciated her directness, even as it terrified him. "I think we're trying to figure out if last night was an isolated moment of insanity or the beginning of something real." "And which do you think it was?" Ethan met her eyes, seeing the vulnerability there beneath her executive composure. "I think if it was just insanity, we wouldn't be here. We'd both be pretending it never happened and hoping the awkwardness fades eventually. Victoria nodded slowly. Jennifer Lai warned me this morning. She didn't say it directly, but the message was clear. People are going to notice if I show special interest in a specific analyst. She warned me too, and mentioned that Daniel Cross is asking questions about the analyst pool. Color drained from Victoria's face. Already? God, he moves fast. What does he want? Leverage, ammunition, any irregularity he can use to undermine my leadership. Victoria's hands twisted together on the table, betraying her anxiety. If he finds out about us, about this, whatever this is, he'll frame it as evidence that I'm emotionally compromised, that I'm making decisions based on personal relationships rather than business judgment. Are you? The question came out sharper than Ethan intended, but Victoria didn't flinch. No. My decision to request your Q3 analysis was legitimate. Your work is exceptional, and I want to understand your methodology. The fact that I also wanted an excuse to see you doesn't change that the business reason is valid. But Daniel won't care about the validity. No, he'll care about the optics. CEO takes special interest in junior analyst. Rumors start. Judgment gets questioned. She rubbed her eyes tiredly. This is why executives don't date employees. It's not just about power dynamics, though those matter. It's about giving your enemies weapons to use against you. The waiter returned to take their order. They selected pastas almost at random, neither really caring about food. Once he'd left again, Ethan leaned forward, keeping his voice low. So we stop. We walk away now, before this becomes something Daniel can weaponize. Victoria's eyes snapped to his, sharp with something that might have been hurt. Is that what you want? No, but I'm trying to understand what we're up against. You have a job to protect, a reputation, a career. I'm just an analyst. The cost-benefit analysis here isn't balanced. Don't do that. Victoria's voice was fierce despite its quietness. Don't minimize yourself. You're not just anything, Ethan, and this isn't a cost-benefit analysis. This is two people trying to figure out if they're brave enough to reach for something real despite all the very valid reasons not to. Ethan felt something crack in his chest, the same feeling from last night when Victoria had looked at him like he mattered. What if we're not brave enough? Then we walk away and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have happened if we'd been willing to risk it. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his, close enough to bridge the gap if he chose, far enough to maintain plausible deniability if anyone glanced their way. I'm tired of wondering, Ethan. I've spent 41 years playing it safe, making calculated decisions, choosing security over uncertainty, and I'm so tired of being lonely. Her honesty broke through Ethan's defenses completely. He closed the distance between their hands, his fingers finding hers, their touch hidden from view by the table's edge. I'm tired too, of being invisible, of going through the motions, of pretending that numbers are enough. So we do this? Victoria's fingers tightened around his. We try, despite the risks and the complications, and Daniel Cross circling like a shark? We try, Ethan confirmed, feeling terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. But we need rules, boundaries, some way to protect both of us from the worst-case scenarios. Victoria nodded, her expression shifting into the strategic focus she brought to business challenges. Agreed. At work, we maintain complete professionalism. No special treatment, no obvious favoritism. Any interactions need to have legitimate business justification. And outside work? We're careful, discreet, at least until we figure out what this is and whether it has a future. She paused, pain flickering across her face. I hate that we have to hide, but the alternative is handing Daniel exactly what he needs to destroy my credibility. What about your executive team? Don't you have allies who could support you? Some, but corporate loyalty is conditional. People support you when it's advantageous and distance themselves when association becomes risky. If this becomes a scandal, most of my team will step back to protect their own positions. Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact, resigned to political realities Ethan was only beginning to understand. That's not cynicism. It's just how these environments work. Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the weight of everything they'd discussed settling between them. Ethan watched Victoria toy with her pasta, Her appetite clearly diminished by stress, and felt a surge of protectiveness that had no basis in logic. He barely knew this woman beyond last night's intense connection, and yet the thought of her facing Daniel Cross's machinations alone made him want to do something reckless and probably stupid. "What if we beat him to it?" Ethan said suddenly. Victoria looked up. "What?" "Daniel's power comes from secrecy, from being the one who exposes irregularities. What if we control the narrative instead? Not announce anything publicly," he added quickly, seeing alarm flash across her face, "but quietly let the right people know that we're seeing each other. Frame it ourselves before he can frame it as a scandal. That's incredibly risky. So is hiding and hoping he doesn't find out. At least this way we're choosing how the story gets told." Victoria set down her fork, considering. Who would we tell? Jennifer Lai, for me. She already suspects something. If we bring her in voluntarily, she might be willing to provide cover rather than becoming an accidental liability. Ethan was thinking out loud now, applying analytical frameworks to an inherently messy situation. For you, maybe someone on the executive team you trust completely. Sarah Yoon, my chief of staff. She's loyal and discreet, and she understands the political landscape. Victoria's expression was conflicted, trapped between hope and caution. But Ethan, even if we control the initial narrative, we can't control how it spreads. People will talk. Assumptions will be made. Let them talk. As long as our work remains excellent and our behavior stays professional, what can they really prove? He reached for her hand again, emboldened by daylight and decision. "I'm not saying this won't be hard, but I'd rather fight for something real than surrender to fear before we've even started." Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "When did you get so brave?" "About 12 hours ago, when I walked into the aquarium instead of going home." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "Best decision you ever made?" "Definitely top 3. "Only top 3? "Well, I once bet everything on a cryptocurrency just before it crashed, which taught me valuable lessons about risk assessment. And in college, I decided to take an 8 a.m. philosophy class that fundamentally changed how I think about ethics and meaning. So there's competition." Victoria's laugh strengthened, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I like this. The way you make me laugh even when everything feels impossible. Someone wise once told me that impossibility is just another variable to account for." That person sounds insufferably pretentious. She has her moments. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "So what do we do? Control the narrative? Or keep hiding?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as she weighed options and calculated risks. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the decisiveness that made her an effective CEO. "We control it. Carefully. Sarah first, then Jennifer. We frame this as 2 adults entering a relationship with full awareness of the professional complications and commitment to maintaining appropriate boundaries. And if Daniel finds out anyway, then we deal with it, together." She met his eyes, and Ethan saw steel beneath the vulnerability. "I didn't get where I am by letting bullies dictate my choices. If he wants to come after me, he'll discover I'm a lot harder to destroy than he thinks." They finished lunch with plans forming. How to approach their respective confidants, what language to use, how to maintain professional distance while nurturing personal connection. It felt strange to strategize romance like a corporate initiative, but the structure also made it feel manageable, like they were building a framework to support something fragile and new. When the check came, Victoria reached for it immediately. "My idea, my treat. People might notice if you expense a business lunch that wasn't business." She smiled. "I'm paying cash. And this absolutely was business. We discussed your Q3 analysis extensively." "Did we?" "We're about to. Walk with me?" They left Giovanni's together, emerging into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright after the restaurant's dimness. Victoria led him down a side street away from Meridian Global toward a small park that offered benches and relative privacy. "Tell me about your analysis," Victoria said as they walked. "I meant it when I said I want to understand your methodology. The forecasting accuracy you've achieved shouldn't be possible with standard modeling techniques." Ethan launched into an explanation of his approach, the conversation shifting easily into the professional realm. He described the additional data sources he'd incorporated, The machine learning algorithms he'd adapted from academic research, the way he'd weighted variables based on historical patterns that traditional models ignored. Victoria listened with focused intensity, asking questions that demonstrated genuine understanding rather than polite interest. "This is exceptional work," she said when he finished. "Why haven't you published these techniques? Presented at industry conferences?" "Because that would require stepping into the spotlight, being noticed. And you don't want to be noticed." "Didn't want to be," Ethan corrected. "Past tense, things are changing." They'd reached the park, settling onto a bench positioned beneath a large oak tree. The location offered some privacy while maintaining enough public visibility to appear innocent. Two professionals taking a break, nothing more. "Ethan, I need to tell you something about Daniel Cross." Victoria's tone had shifted, carrying a weight that made Ethan's attention sharpen. "He's dangerous in ways that go beyond typical corporate rivalry. When Robert Morrison was being pushed out, Daniel saw an opportunity to claim the CEO position himself. He'd been VP of strategy for 8 years, had strong board relationships, understood the company inside and out. But the board chose you instead." "Yes, and Daniel has never forgiven that rejection. He spent the last 18 months positioning himself to prove that the board made the wrong choice." Victoria's hands twisted together in her lap. "He has resources, connections, people throughout the company who report to him either out of loyalty or fear. So we're dealing with someone who has the means and motivation to destroy you. Not just me, anyone associated with me, anyone he perceives as a threat or an obstacle." She turned to face him fully. "If you do this, if you choose to be with me, you're putting yourself in his crosshairs. He'll investigate your background, scrutinize your work, look for any vulnerability he can exploit." Ethan felt cold despite the afternoon warmth. "What will he find?" "I don't know. That's what I'm asking you. Is there anything in your past that could be weaponized? Anything he could use to discredit you or make our relationship look inappropriate?" The question forced Ethan to mentally review his own history, searching for scandals or secrets. His life had been deliberately boring, no dramatic failures, no controversial relationships, no skeletons hidden in closets, just quiet competence and careful isolation. Nothing significant. Student loans I'm still paying off, but everyone has those. A relationship that ended badly in college, but that was 8 years ago and completely mutual. I've never been fired, never faced disciplinary action, never done anything that would show up in a background check. Victoria nodded, looking somewhat relieved. "Good. That limits his angles of attack. He'll probably focus on framing you as opportunistic, the ambitious analyst using a relationship to advance his career. Except I'm not ambitious, at least not in the way he'll claim. The truth won't matter if the narrative is compelling enough. People believe what confirms their existing assumptions about how the world works." Victoria's voice carried bitter experience. "A young analyst and an older female CEO? The default assumption will be that you're using me, not that we're simply two people who connected." Ethan heard the pain beneath her words. Years of having motives questioned, achievements attributed to factors other than competence, relationships analyzed through lenses of suspicion rather than possibility. Then we prove them wrong. Not with words, but with consistency, professional excellence, appropriate boundaries. Make it so obvious that this relationship isn't affecting our work that the narrative loses credibility. That's easier said than done. Most worthwhile things are. He shifted on the bench, angling toward her. "Victoria, I'm not naive about the risks, but I'm also not willing to surrender before the fight has even started. If Daniel Cross wants to come after us, let him come. We'll deal with it together." Victoria's expression was complex, gratitude and fear, and something that might have been hope. "You really mean that?" "Yes. Even though you could walk away right now with no consequences? Return to your quiet analyst life, your careful invisibility?" "I don't want that life anymore. You showed me something better." "What?" "Connection. Being seen. The possibility that life could be more than spreadsheets and solitude." Ethan reached for her hand, holding it openly despite the public setting. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Victoria's fingers tightened around his, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Okay. together. They sat in silence for a while, hands linked, watching the park's afternoon activity. Dog walkers and joggers, parents with strollers, people engaged in the ordinary rhythms of Friday life. Eventually, Victoria checked her watch and sighed. I need to get back. Sarah will be wondering where I disappeared to. When do you want to tell her? Tonight. At her place, off campus. Safer that way. Victoria stood, reluctantly releasing his hand. You'll talk to Jennifer? Monday morning. Give her the weekend to process before we have to interact professionally. Smart. Victoria smiled, but worry lingered in her eyes. Ethan, one more thing. If this becomes too much, if the pressure or the scrutiny or Daniel's attacks get to be more than you signed up for, you can walk away. I won't hold it against you. I won't walk away. You say that now. I won't walk away, Ethan repeated firmly. Stop giving me exits. Stop assuming I'll retreat when things get difficult. I'm here, fully committed. Whatever happens, we face it together. Victoria's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed in public. How did I get so lucky? I think luck has nothing to do with it. I think we both took a risk on something terrifying and real. They parted at the park's edge, maintaining professional distance as they walked separate routes back to Meridian Global. Ethan took the long way, using the extra time to settle his mind and prepare for the return to normalcy. By the time he reached the analyst floor, he'd successfully compartmentalized the afternoon's emotions, his expression as neutral and unremarkable as always. Marcus glanced up as Ethan passed. Long lunch. Had some thinking to do. Everything okay? Yeah. Ethan settled into his chair, waking his monitor. Everything's good. And for the first time in years, he actually meant it. The weekend passed in a strange suspension of time, hours stretching and contracting unpredictably, as Ethan waited for Monday morning and the conversation with Jennifer Lai that would set everything in motion. Victoria texted him Saturday afternoon with an update. She'd told Sarah Yoon everything, and while her chief of staff had expressed serious concerns about the risks, she'd also promised her full support and discretion. She thinks we're crazy, Victoria's message read, but she also said it's the most human she's seen me in years, so there's that. Ethan had smiled at his phone, alone in his apartment with coffee and the Sunday crossword he never quite finished. Crazy might be the right approach. Sanity hasn't been working out great for either of us. True. How are you holding up? Nervous, excited, terrified, the usual emotional cocktail when you're about to tell your boss you're dating the CEO. If it helps, I'm equally terrified about facing the executive team on Monday, knowing Sarah is the only one who knows the truth. It didn't help exactly, but it reminded Ethan that he wasn't alone in this anxious anticipation. They were both stepping into unknown territory, both risking careers and reputations for something that had barely started. The irrationality of it should have sent him retreating to safety. Instead, it made him more certain that this mattered, that people didn't take these kinds of risks for casual connections or fleeting attraction. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain, weather that matched Ethan's mood as he dressed for work. He'd rehearsed the conversation with Jennifer a dozen times over the weekend, trying different phrasings and approaches, but none of them felt quite right. How did you tell your supervisor that you were romantically involved with the CEO without sounding either apologetic or defensive? He arrived at Meridian Global 15 minutes earlier than usual, hoping to catch Jennifer before the analyst floor filled with people. Her office was on the 16th floor, a small space with a window view and enough room for a desk, 2 guest chairs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with financial texts and industry publications. The door was open, and Jennifer sat behind her desk with reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing something on her tablet. Ethan knocked on the doorframe. Do you have a few minutes? Jennifer looked up, and something in his expression must have telegraphed the seriousness of his request because her professional smile faded into careful attention. Of course. Close the door. He did, then settled into one of the guest chairs, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Jennifer set aside her tablet and folded her hands on her desk, waiting with the patient focus that made her an excellent manager. I need to tell you something, Ethan began, because I value your guidance and because I don't want you to be blindsided when this becomes office knowledge. This sounds serious. It is. He took a breath, committing fully. Victoria Hale and I are seeing each other, romantically. It's very new, just started last week, but it's real, and we're both committed to handling it appropriately. The silence that followed felt enormous. Jennifer's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that might have been resignation. She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes, a gesture Ethan had learned meant she was processing something complicated. "Well," she said finally, "that explains the unusual CEO interest. My work is still legitimate. The Q3 analysis she requested is genuinely valuable." Jennifer held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm not questioning the quality of your work, Ethan. I know you're exceptional at what you do, but I need you to understand the position this puts both of you in, especially her. We understand the risks." "Do you?" Jennifer's voice was sharp, not unkind, but brutally honest. "Because from where I'm sitting, I see a CEO who's already fighting to maintain credibility in a company where half the executives think she's too young and the other half resent that she's a woman. Add a relationship with a subordinate, even an indirect subordinate several levels removed, and you're handing ammunition to everyone who wants to undermine her authority." Ethan felt heat rise in his face. "I'm not trying to undermine anyone. We're just two people who connected." "I believe you, but corporate environments don't run on belief. They run on perception and politics." Jennifer leaned forward, her expression intense. "Daniel Cross is already circling. You know that, right? He's been making inquiries, building his case against Victoria's leadership. If he finds out about this relationship, he'll use it to frame her as emotionally compromised, unprofessional, unable to maintain appropriate boundaries." "We're maintaining boundaries. At work, everything stays completely professional. No favoritism, no special treatment." "Ethan," Jennifer's voice was gentle now, almost sad. "You're a brilliant analyst, but you're naive about how these things actually work. It doesn't matter what you intend or how careful you are. The moment this becomes public knowledge, everything Victoria does involving you or your work will be scrutinized and questioned. Every project assignment, every performance review, every interaction will be analyzed for evidence of bias." The words settled into Ethan's stomach like lead. He'd known intellectually that there would be complications, but hearing Jennifer spell out the specific mechanisms of professional destruction made it feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. "So what are you saying? That we should end it?" Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as if weighing options. "I'm saying you need to be smarter than you're being. If you're going to do this, if you're both truly committed, then you need strategies beyond just being professional. You need documentation. You need witnesses. You need to create a paper trail that demonstrates Victoria's decisions regarding your career are based on merit and business necessity, not personal favoritism." Ethan's analyst brain engaged immediately, seeing the logic. "Performance reviews, project assignments with clear justification, third-party validation of my work quality." "Exactly. And more than that, you need to anticipate Daniel's attacks and preemptively neutralize them." Jennifer pulled her tablet back toward her, stylus moving rapidly across the screen. "I'm going to do something that could cost me my own credibility if this goes sideways. I'm going to help you build a defense." "Why?" The question emerged before Ethan could stop it. "Why would you risk yourself for this?" Jennifer looked up, and her expression was complex, professional calculation mixed with something warmer. "Because I've watched Victoria Hale transform this company over the last 18 months. She's brilliant and dedicated, and she works harder than anyone I've ever known. And she's also desperately lonely, which I recognize because I've been there myself." She paused, vulnerability flickering across her face. "After my divorce, I threw myself into work for 3 years. No life outside this building, no connections, just endless productivity to fill the silence. I don't want that for her. Or for you." The admission surprised Ethan. Jennifer rarely shared personal information, maintaining professional distance even with the analysts she managed closely. Her willingness to be vulnerable felt like a gift, an extension of trust he hadn't earned. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding and for helping. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be complicated and potentially painful." Jennifer returned her attention to her tablet, making notes. First things first. We need to establish clear documentation of your performance independent of Victoria's involvement. I'm going to request that external consultants review your Q3 analysis and methodology. Their validation will provide third-party credibility. That seems excessive for routine financial modeling. It's not routine. Your forecasting accuracy is genuinely exceptional, and having independent experts confirm that will be valuable regardless of your relationship with Victoria. We're just accelerating a process that should have happened anyway. Jennifer's stylist moved rapidly. I'll also recommend you for the Advanced Analytics Training Program. It's competitive, selection is merit-based, and it'll demonstrate that your career advancement is driven by legitimate achievement. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, the tight anxiety of facing this alone giving way to relief that someone competent and strategic was helping build protections. What else? Distance yourself from Victoria professionally, at least in visible ways. No more direct meetings unless absolutely necessary and documented. All communication should have legitimate business purpose and ideally should include other people. Make it impossible for anyone to claim you're receiving special access. The suggestion made sense strategically, but it also hurt in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. He'd finally found connection with someone who saw him, and now he was being told to retreat into professional invisibility again. Jennifer must have seen something in his expression because her voice softened. I'm not saying you can't have a relationship. I'm saying you can't have an obvious one within these walls. Outside work, on your own time, that's your business. But here, you need to be so professionally distant that nobody could reasonably argue Victoria is showing you favoritism. She's not showing me favoritism. I know that. You know that. But we need to make it so obvious that even Daniel Cross can't construct a credible argument otherwise. Jennifer set down her stylus, fixing Ethan with a serious look. He's going to come after both of you, not might, will. The only question is whether you'll be prepared when he does. The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Has he approached you? Asked about me specifically? Not yet, but he will. Daniel's methodical. He gathers information quietly before making his move. Right now, he's probably still in the intelligence gathering phase, talking to people throughout the company, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities. Jennifer's expression was troubled. When he does approach me, I need to be able to honestly say that your work is exceptional, your career advancement is merit-based, and I've seen no evidence of inappropriate favoritism from executive leadership. All of which is true. Yes, but truth is only as good as your ability to defend it, which is why we're building documentation now, before the attacks start. Jennifer pulled up a calendar on her tablet. I'm scheduling a review meeting with the CFO for end of next week. We'll discuss the analyst pool's performance, and I'll specifically highlight your contributions. That creates a record of your value that predates any potential accusations. Ethan nodded, his mind racing through implications and strategies. This was starting to feel less like a romance and more like a military campaign, complete with defensive fortifications and preemptive strikes. The sheer complexity of it was overwhelming. Jennifer, can I ask you something, off the record? She smiled slightly. We're already pretty far off the record, but go ahead. Do you think this is worth it? The complications and risks and political maneuvering? Is it worth all this just to be with someone? Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you that after my divorce, I convinced myself that work was enough, that professional achievement could fill all the spaces in my life that needed filling. And I was wrong. Her eyes refocused on Ethan, sharp and serious. We're not built to be alone, even those of us who are good at it. If you found someone who makes you want to be seen, who makes you brave enough to risk the safety of invisibility, then yes, that's worth fighting for. The conviction in her voice settled something in Ethan's chest. Then we fight. Smart and carefully. Daniel Cross is brilliant and ruthless. He doesn't make mistakes, and he doesn't leave openings for counterattack. Jennifer's expression hardened. But he also underestimates people he considers beneath him, which might be his only weakness. They spent another 20 minutes mapping strategy, specific actions Ethan should take, documentation he should maintain, ways to create professional distance while preserving personal connection. By the time Ethan left Jennifer's office, He felt simultaneously more prepared and more overwhelmed. This was going to be harder than he'd imagined, requiring constant vigilance and strategic thinking that went far beyond his analytical comfort zone. The analyst floor was filling with the Monday morning rush when Ethan returned to his desk. Marcus was already deep into something on his monitor, coffee steaming beside his keyboard. Priya was on a phone call, her voice carrying the patient exasperation of someone explaining basic concepts to someone who should already understand them. Normal office rhythms, unchanged by the seismic shifts happening beneath the surface. Ethan settled into his chair and opened his email, scanning through the overnight accumulation. Most were routine, but one message stopped him cold. The sender was Daniel Cross. The subject line read, "Coffee?" His hands went still on the keyboard. This was it. The approach Jennifer had predicted, happening faster than either of them had anticipated. Ethan clicked on the message, his pulse quickening. "Ethan, I've been hearing impressive things about your analytical work from several sources. I'd love to pick your brain about some strategic initiatives I'm developing. Are you free for coffee this week? Best, Daniel." The message was perfectly calibrated, friendly without being overly familiar, professional with just enough personal interest to feel flattering. To anyone reading it, the email would seem like a senior executive reaching out to a talented junior employee, an entirely normal interaction. But Ethan could see the trap beneath the courtesy. Daniel wanted information, wanted to assess him, probe for weaknesses, determine whether he could be useful or needed to be neutralized. Ethan's first instinct was to decline, to maintain distance from Victoria's primary antagonist. But Jennifer's words echoed in his mind. They needed to anticipate Daniel's attacks and preemptively neutralize them, which meant Ethan needed to understand what Daniel was planning, what angles he was pursuing, how much he already knew. He crafted a response carefully, keeping it professionally distant, but not obviously evasive. "Daniel, I appreciate the outreach. My schedule is fairly packed this week with quarter-end analysis, but I could do coffee Thursday morning if that works for you." Thursday gave him 3 days to prepare, to strategize with Jennifer and Victoria about how to handle the conversation. The delay might frustrate Daniel, but it was reasonable enough not to raise suspicion. The response came within minutes. "Thursday works perfectly. Let's say 9 a.m. at the Starbucks on Market Street. Looking forward to it." Ethan stared at the message, anxiety and determination warring in his chest. In 4 days, he would sit across from Daniel Cross and have to navigate a conversation layered with subtext and strategic purpose while appearing casual and unguarded. The prospect was terrifying. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. How did it go with Jennifer? He glanced around to ensure nobody was watching, then typed quickly. "Better than expected. She's helping us build defenses. But Daniel just reached out asking for coffee Thursday." "Already? That's fast even for him." "What should I do?" "Meet with him. But be careful. Daniel is exceptionally good at extracting information without seeming to ask direct questions. Don't volunteer anything personal, and definitely don't mention us." "Obviously." "I know it's obvious. I'm just nervous." "He's dangerous, Ethan, more than you realize." Ethan wanted to ask what she meant by that, but his desk phone rang. The analyst pool supervisor asking for an update on the revenue variance report. He sent Victoria a quick "we'll talk tonight" message and dove into work, grateful for the familiar refuge of numbers and analysis. The day progressed in a blur of spreadsheets and meetings, the normal rhythm of corporate life continuing despite the emotional turbulence churning beneath Ethan's surface calm. He caught glimpses of Victoria once, passing through the analyst floor on her way to a meeting, her expression professionally neutral as she nodded at various employees. Their eyes met for just a second, a flash of connection too brief for anyone else to notice, and then she was gone. That evening, Ethan drove to Victoria's apartment, a decision they'd made carefully, weighing the risks of being seen together against the need for private conversation. She lived in a building downtown, the kind of upscale development that featured doormen and security cameras and the illusion of privacy within urban density. Ethan had never been there before, and walking through the lobby felt surreal, as if he were crossing into a part of Victoria's life that had previously existed only in his imagination. She met him at her apartment door, dressed in comfortable clothes, leggings, and an oversized sweater that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her executive wardrobe allowed. The apartment itself was exactly what he'd expected, tastefully furnished, immaculately organized, full of evidence of a life lived almost entirely through work. Bookshelves held business texts and leadership memoirs. The kitchen looked barely used. Art on the walls was expensive but impersonal, the kind of pieces chosen by decorators rather than owners. "Welcome to my fortress of solitude," Victoria said with a self-deprecating smile. "It's not much, but it's home." Sort of. Ethan stepped inside and she closed the door behind him, engaging multiple locks with practiced efficiency. For a moment, they simply stood in her entryway, the privacy suddenly awkward after days of stolen texts and careful distance. Then Victoria moved forward and wrapped her arms around him, her face pressing against his chest, and the awkwardness dissolved. Ethan held her, feeling the tension in her body gradually ease, and realized they were both starving for this. Uncomplicated physical contact, connection without performance or strategy. "Long day?" he murmured against her hair. "Endless." The board meeting was brutal. 3 hours of questions about the Singapore expansion and whether we're overextending our resources. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Daniel was there, asking pointed questions designed to make me look reckless and poorly prepared. "Were you?" "No, I had answers for everything, backed by data and risk analysis. But he made sure to frame his questions in ways that created doubt, that made the board wonder if I was being too aggressive." Frustration leaked into her voice. That's his specialty, planting seeds of uncertainty that grow into full-scale concerns over time. Ethan guided her toward the couch, and they settled together, Victoria tucking herself against his side with the ease of someone starved for comfort. "Jennifer thinks he's going to come after both of us hard once he finds out about the relationship." "She's right. The question is how he'll frame the attack. As evidence of my poor judgment, your opportunism, a distraction from strategic focus?" Victoria's hand found his, fingers intertwining. "He's probably wargaming scenarios right now, trying to determine which narrative will be most damaging. Then we need our own narrative, our own framing that neutralizes his attacks before they land." Victoria tilted her head to look at him, curiosity in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Jennifer suggested building documentation, external validation of my work, merit-based advancement, professional distance within the office, all defensive measures. But what if we also went on offense? How? Ethan's mind was working through possibilities, applying analytical frameworks to political warfare. Daniel's credibility comes from being seen as the rational alternative to your supposedly risky leadership. What if we undermine that credibility by highlighting his own vulnerabilities, his blind spots and biases? "You're talking about going after Daniel Cross directly." Victoria's voice was uncertain, caught between hope and caution. "That's incredibly dangerous. He has resources and allies we can't match. But he also has weaknesses. Everyone does." Ethan shifted to face her more fully. "What do you know about his background? His track record before Meridian Global?" Victoria thought for a moment. "He came from a competitor, Whitmore Industries. VP of strategy there for 5 years before we recruited him. Solid track record, good relationships, no obvious scandals. Why did he leave Whitmore?" "He said he wanted new challenges, bigger opportunities. Whitmore was plateauing and he saw more growth potential here." "And you believe that?" Victoria's expression shifted as she considered the question. "I wasn't CEO yet when he was hired, so I wasn't part of the decision. But now that you mention it, it does seem odd. Strategy VPs don't usually leave stable positions at competitors without a compelling reason." "So we find the reason. We look into his background, his performance at Whitmore, any patterns or problems that might explain why he really left." Ethan could see the strategy forming, pieces clicking together. "If we can find evidence that Daniel has his own credibility issues, it neutralizes his ability to attack yours. That's opposition research, corporate espionage. That's due diligence, understanding the people making decisions that affect the company." Ethan kept his voice steady, convincing. "We're not fabricating anything or breaking laws. We're just looking at publicly available information more carefully than anyone has before." Victoria was quiet, weighing the proposal. "Sarah might be able to help. She has contacts throughout the industry, people who would know about Daniel's reputation at Whitmore. Do it quietly, casually, just background research to better understand the executive team. And if we find something, Then we have leverage, insurance against Daniel's attacks. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. I'm not saying we use it immediately or maliciously, but having it means we're not defenseless. Victoria nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. Okay, I'll ask Sarah to make some inquiries, carefully. She leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you become a strategic thinker? I thought you were just a numbers guy. Strategy is just applied mathematics, probability, risk assessment, optimizing for desired outcomes. The principles are the same whether you're forecasting revenue or planning corporate warfare. Corporate warfare, Victoria repeated softly. That's what this has become, hasn't it? We're at war with Daniel Cross, and the stakes are our careers and reputations. And each other. Ethan turned to kiss the top of her head, which makes it a war worth fighting. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of strategy and preparation giving way to simpler presence. Eventually, Victoria ordered Thai food from a place she claimed made the best pad Thai in the city, and they ate on her couch while some true crime documentary played unwatched on the television. It felt remarkably normal, two people sharing a meal and quiet evening, the kind of ordinary intimacy that Ethan had convinced himself he didn't need. Around 10, his phone buzzed with an email notification. He almost ignored it, but something made him check, and immediately wished he hadn't. The message was from Marcus Chen, sent to the entire analyst pool. The subject line read, "Interesting observation. Hey team, random question. Has anyone else noticed that Brooks has been getting unusual attention from upstairs lately? CEO requesting his analysis directly, VP of Finance running interference. Just seems weird. Probably nothing, but thought I'd mention it." Ethan's blood went cold. The message was phrased casually, almost innocently, but the implication was clear. People were noticing, speculating, building narratives. And Marcus had just broadcast those suspicions to 20 other analysts, ensuring the whispers would spread exponentially. Victoria noticed his expression change. "What's wrong?" He handed her his phone without speaking, watching her face as she read the message. Color drained from her cheeks, and her hand trembled slightly as she returned the device. "It's starting," she said quietly. "The scrutiny. The questions. Should I respond? Try to shut it down? No, responding makes it seem like there's something to hide. Better to let it sit unanswered. Most people will dismiss it as Marcus being paranoid or attention-seeking, but Victoria's voice lacked conviction, and Ethan could see fear in her eyes. We knew this would happen. We just didn't expect it quite this fast. Ethan's phone buzzed again. A text from Jennifer Lai. Saw Marcus's email, don't engage. Come see me first thing tomorrow. The fact that Jennifer was monitoring analyst pool communications after hours spoke to how seriously she was taking the situation. Ethan sent a quick acknowledgement and pocketed his phone, trying to ignore the anxiety churning in his gut. Maybe we should cool things down, Victoria said, her voice small. Give the speculation time to fade before... No, Ethan cut her off firmly. That's exactly what they want, for us to retreat, to act guilty, to behave as if we've done something wrong. We haven't. We're two adults in a relationship, handling it responsibly. We don't hide because people are gossiping. Ethan, you don't understand how fast this can spiral. One casual observation becomes office rumor, becomes HR investigation, becomes full-blown scandal. I've seen it happen. Then we get ahead of it. We control the narrative before it controls us. He took both her hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Tomorrow, I talk to Jennifer about next steps. You talk to Sarah about the Daniel research. We build our defenses and prepare our offense, and we don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us scared. Victoria searched his face, some of the fear fading as determination took its place. You're sure about this? About us? Because once we commit to this path, there's no easy way back. I'm sure. And he was, more certain than he'd been about anything in years. Whatever happens, we face it together. She nodded, then leaned forward to kiss him, and for a few moments the world narrowed to just that. Connection and warmth and the stubborn defiance of choosing each other despite everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria's expression had shifted from fear to something fiercer. Okay, she said, together, no matter what comes. Ethan left her apartment near midnight, hyper-aware of security cameras and the possibility of being seen. The paranoia felt justified now. Marcus's email had proven that people were watching, questioning, building narratives. Every interaction would be scrutinized, every deviation from routine noted and analyzed. The drive home took him through empty streets, the city's nighttime face stripped of its daytime performance. Ethan's mind raced through scenarios and strategies, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Marcus's email would spread, analysts would gossip, speculation would build, questions would be asked. Jennifer would help manage the internal politics, but she couldn't control what people thought or said in private conversations. And Thursday, he would sit across from Daniel Cross and have to maintain perfect composure while being interrogated by someone who wanted to destroy Victoria's career. The sheer complexity of it should have made him reconsider, should have sent him running back to the safety of invisible competence. Instead, it made him angry. Angry that two people couldn't simply be together without triggering corporate warfare. Angry that Victoria had to constantly defend her competence and judgment against people threatened by her success. Angry that his own quiet excellence was being reframed as opportunistic ambition. But anger, properly channeled, could be useful. Ethan had spent 5 years being professionally invisible, which meant he'd observed things others missed. He knew how information flowed through the company, who gossiped with whom, which executives held real power versus those with impressive titles and empty influence. That knowledge could be weaponized if he was willing to step out of the shadows and actually use it. Tuesday morning, Ethan arrived at Jennifer's office before 7, while the building was still mostly empty. She was already there, 2 monitors displaying complex financial models, coffee steaming at her elbow. "Marcus's email," she said without preamble. "Damage assessment?" "Minimal so far. Nobody responded publicly, which means they're discussing it in private channels I can't monitor." Ethan settled into the guest chair. "But the narrative is forming. Junior analyst receiving unusual executive attention. People will fill in their own explanations, most of them unflattering to both me and Victoria." Jennifer nodded grimly. "I had a conversation with Marcus last night. Off the record, supposedly casual. He claims he was just making an observation. No malice intended." "Do you believe him?" "I believe he's ambitious enough to notice patterns and stupid enough not to understand the implications of broadcasting them." She pulled up something on her left monitor, a personnel file, though Ethan couldn't read the details from his angle. "Marcus has been angling for promotion to senior analyst for 6 months. He's competent, but not exceptional, and he resents that you consistently outperform him despite lower seniority." So this was jealousy disguised as curiosity. Probably, which makes it manageable but not harmless. Daniel Cross is good at exploiting existing resentments. He might approach Marcus, validate his concerns, encourage him to pay closer attention to your career trajectory. Jennifer's expression was troubled. "We need to assume anything you do from this point forward will be monitored and reported." The thought sent chills down Ethan's spine. Professional paranoia as standard operating procedure. Welcome to life under scrutiny. It's exhausting and it never really ends. Jennifer closed the personnel file and fixed Ethan with a serious look. "I've scheduled the external review of your Q3 analysis for Friday. 3 industry experts, completely independent, will evaluate your methodology and conclusions. Their validation will help establish that your work quality isn't dependent on executive favor." "And the coffee meeting with Daniel on Thursday? Record it if you can. Not overtly, just keep your phone in your pocket with a recording app running. Depending on your state's laws, you might not be able to use it legally, but at minimum, it'll give you an exact record of what was said." Ethan hadn't considered recording the conversation, but the suggestion made strategic sense. What if he asks about my relationship with Victoria directly? Deny it. Lie if you have to. I know that feels wrong, but you're under no obligation to discuss your personal life with Daniel Cross. Jennifer's voice was hard, defensive. "He'll be fishing for confirmation, trying to get you to admit something he can use. Don't give him anything." "Won't lying make it worse when the truth comes out?" "Maybe, but right now the truth is a weapon pointed at both of you. Until we have adequate defenses in place, that weapon stays holstered." She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion evident in her posture. "I'm not saying lie forever, I'm saying protect yourselves until you're strong enough to withstand the attacks that revelation will trigger." Ethan nodded, though discomfort sat heavy in his chest. He'd built his professional reputation on accuracy and honesty. Lying to Daniel Cross, even by omission, felt like abandoning core principles. But Jennifer was right about the strategic necessity. They weren't ready for full exposure yet. The rest of Tuesday and Wednesday passed in tense anticipation, each hour bringing Ethan closer to Thursday morning's coffee meeting. He prepared obsessively, reviewing everything he knew about Daniel Cross, rehearsing responses to potential questions, trying to anticipate traps hidden in casual conversation. Victoria texted him periodic updates. Sarah was making inquiries about Daniel's time at Whitmore Industries, but so far nothing concrete had emerged. Wednesday night, Ethan barely slept, his mind churning through scenarios. When his alarm finally sounded at 6, he felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, running on anxiety and determination in equal measure. He dressed carefully that morning, professional but not trying too hard, the same unremarkable style he'd cultivated for 5 years. The goal was to appear exactly as uninteresting as Daniel expected, giving him no reason to dig deeper or question surface impressions. The Starbucks on Market Street was crowded with the morning rush when Ethan arrived at 8:55. Daniel was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 coffees waiting. He stood as Ethan approached, extending a hand with practiced warmth. "Ethan, thanks for making time. I know quarter end is brutal for you analysts." Daniel's smile was perfect, friendly without being overfamiliar, powerful without being intimidating. He was in his late 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from years of winning corporate battles. They shook hands and Ethan felt his phone's weight in his pocket, the recording app already running. "Happy to connect. I'm always interested in hearing about strategic initiatives." "Well, I won't take too much of your time," Daniel said as they sat. "I've been working on some growth scenarios for emerging markets, and I keep hearing that you're the go-to person for predictive financial modeling." The flattery was obvious but effectively delivered. "I appreciate that, though I'm sure any of our senior analysts could help with forecasting." "Perhaps. But you have something they don't: accuracy. Your Q3 projections have been spot on for 2 years running. That's not luck, that's methodology." Daniel leaned forward slightly, projecting genuine interest. "I'm curious about your approach. What are you doing differently?" Ethan launched into a technical explanation, keeping it detailed enough to seem forthcoming while avoiding anything proprietary or unique to his specific techniques. Daniel listened with apparent fascination, asking intelligent questions that demonstrated real understanding of financial analysis. But beneath the professional conversation, Ethan could feel something else happening. An assessment, a cataloging of his responses and mannerisms, Daniel gathering information that had nothing to do with forecasting methodology. After 15 minutes of technical discussion, Daniel shifted the conversation subtly. "You know, I've been impressed by how much focus Victoria has been giving to analyst development lately. She personally reviews work from your pool more than any CEO I've worked with." There it was, the first probe disguised as casual observation. Ethan kept his expression neutral. "She's very hands-on. I think it helps her maintain connection to the operational details that drive strategy." "Absolutely. Though I wonder if sometimes she spreads herself too thin, trying to be involved in everything rather than trusting her executive team to filter information appropriately." Daniel's tone was thoughtful, not quite criticism, but close. "What's your impression? Do you feel like you get adequate support from the management chain, or does executive involvement feel intrusive?" The question was designed to elicit complaints, to get Ethan to criticize Victoria or admit that her attention felt inappropriate. He chose his words carefully. "I appreciate any feedback from leadership. Executive attention helps ensure our work aligns with strategic priorities." Very diplomatic. Daniel smiled, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. "You're good at this, saying the right things without revealing much. That's a useful skill in corporate environments." "I try to stay focused on my work rather than politics." "Smart. Though sometimes politics find you whether you want them to or not." Daniel paused, and when he continued, his voice had shifted, still friendly, but with an edge of something harder beneath. "I'll be direct with you, Ethan, because I think you can handle directness. There's been some observation lately about your relationship with executive leadership, specifically with Victoria." Ethan's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. Observation? Questions about whether you're receiving preferential treatment, whether decisions about your career advancement are based purely on merit or on other factors. Daniel's expression was sympathetic, almost apologetic. I want to be clear. I don't think you've done anything wrong, but perception matters in these environments, and right now the perception is that there might be something inappropriate about the attention you're receiving. This was it, the direct attack framed as friendly concern. Jennifer's voice echoed in Ethan's mind. Deny. Protect yourselves. Don't give him ammunition. I'm not aware of any preferential treatment, Ethan said carefully. My work speaks for itself, and any executive attention I've received has been based on the quality of that work. Of course. Daniel nodded, as if completely convinced. But you understand how it looks, right? CEO personally requesting analysis from a specific junior analyst? That's unusual. It creates questions. Questions about my competence? Questions about the nature of the relationship. Daniel let the words hang in the air, watching Ethan's reaction. I'm not suggesting anything improper, but in corporate environments, even the appearance of impropriety can be damaging to both parties involved. Ethan forced himself to meet Daniel's eyes directly, projecting calm confidence he didn't feel. There's nothing improper about my relationship with Victoria Hale. She's the CEO. I'm an analyst. We interact professionally when business requires it. Good. That's good to hear. But Daniel's expression suggested he didn't quite believe it. Because if there were something more personal developing, that would create serious complications. HR concerns, conflict of interest issues, questions about whether Victoria's judgment is being compromised by emotional entanglements. The threat was clear now, barely disguised by concern-trolling language. Daniel was letting Ethan know that he suspected something, that he was watching, that any relationship between Ethan and Victoria would be used as ammunition. I appreciate your concern, Ethan said, his voice harder now. But I can assure you my relationship with the CEO is entirely professional. Daniel studied him for a long moment, then smiled, a calculating expression that never reached his eyes. I'm glad to hear it, because Victoria is under a lot of pressure right now. Board concerns about her strategic direction, questions about whether she's the right person to lead Meridian Global through the next phase of growth. The last thing she needs is additional complications that would undermine confidence in her leadership. Victoria Hale is an exceptional CEO. Is she? Daniel's tone was casual, but the question was pointed. Or is she someone who got promoted too quickly, whose decisions are starting to show the cracks that come from insufficient experience and questionable judgment? Anger flared in Ethan's chest, hot and immediate. This was what Victoria faced constantly, this casual undermining disguised as legitimate concern. But he forced it down, knowing that showing emotion would give Daniel exactly what he wanted. The company's performance under her leadership speaks for itself, Ethan said evenly. Revenue up, costs down, successful strategic initiatives. Those are facts, not opinions. Facts can be interpreted different ways. Strong performance now doesn't guarantee strong performance in the future, especially if leadership judgment becomes compromised. Daniel finished his coffee and stood, signaling the meeting's end. I appreciate your time, Ethan, and I appreciate your discretion regarding what we've discussed here. I'm just trying to look out for the company's interests. Of course. They shook hands again, and Ethan left the Starbucks feeling like he'd just survived an interrogation. His hands were shaking slightly as he walked back to his car, adrenaline flooding his system now that the performance was over. He sat in his car for several minutes, trying to slow his racing heart. Then he pulled out his phone and stopped the recording app, saving the file with shaking fingers. The conversation had been even worse than he'd feared. Daniel had essentially confirmed that he suspected the relationship, that he was building a case against Victoria, and that he viewed Ethan as either a useful pawn or a target to be neutralized. Ethan texted Victoria immediately. Coffee meeting done. He knows something. We need to talk. Her response came within seconds. My office. 1 hour. The drive back to Meridian Global felt surreal, as if Ethan were watching himself from a distance. He'd just lied to a senior executive's face, recorded a conversation that might not be legally admissible, and essentially declared himself an enemy in a corporate war he barely understood. But he'd also protected Victoria, refused to give Daniel ammunition, and demonstrated loyalty that went beyond professional obligation. Jennifer was right. This was going to get worse before it got better. The question was whether they'd be strong enough to survive what was coming. Victoria's office felt different than it had during their previous encounters. Less like neutral corporate territory, and more like the command center of someone preparing for battle. Sarah Yoon was already there when Ethan arrived, her expression grim as she gestured him toward the small conference table tucked in the corner of the expansive space. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt ominous, sealing the three of them into a conversation that would determine everything. "Play the recording," Victoria said without preamble, her CEO voice firmly in place even as her eyes betrayed the fear she was working hard to contain. Ethan pulled out his phone and set it on the table, hitting play. Daniel Cross's voice filled the room, smooth and calculated, each word a carefully placed landmine. As the recording progressed, Victoria's expression hardened, her hands curling into fists on the table. Sarah took notes on her tablet, her stylus moving rapidly across the screen. When it finished, silence hung heavy in the air. Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the windows that overlooked the city. He's not even pretending anymore. That was a direct threat, barely disguised as concern. "He suspects the relationship," Sarah said, her voice tight. "But he doesn't have confirmation yet. That's why he was pushing so hard. He wanted Ethan to slip up, to admit something he could use." "I didn't give him anything," Ethan said, though guilt sat heavy in his chest about the lies he'd told. "I denied everything, just like Jennifer advised." Victoria turned from the window, and the pain in her expression cut through Ethan like a blade. "This is my fault. I should have known better. Should have maintained distance. Should have protected you from this." "Stop!" Ethan stood, crossing to her. "We made this choice together. Both of us, fully aware of the risks. Don't take sole responsibility for consequences we both accepted." "But you didn't accept this," Victoria gestured toward the phone, toward Daniel's recorded threats. "You didn't sign up to be interrogated and threatened and turned into ammunition against me." "Actually, I did. The moment I walked into the aquarium instead of going home, I accepted all of it." Ethan kept his voice steady, willing her to hear him. "I'm not some innocent bystander who got caught in crossfire. I'm choosing this, choosing you. Whatever Daniel throws at us, we handle it together." Sarah cleared her throat, drawing their attention back to the strategic reality. "Daniel's building a case. The coffee meeting was reconnaissance. He's assessing how you'll respond to pressure, whether you'll crack under scrutiny. The real attack is still coming." "What did you find out about Whitmore Industries?" Victoria asked, returning to the conference table with visible effort. "Is there anything in Daniel's background we can use?" Sarah's expression shifted, something dark flickering across her features. "There's something. It took some careful digging and a few favors from contacts in the industry, but I found a pattern." She pulled up documents on her tablet, projecting them onto the wall-mounted screen. "Daniel left Whitmore Industries 3 years ago, officially for new opportunities. But according to people who worked with him there, the real reason was an internal investigation into financial irregularities." Ethan leaned forward, analyst instincts engaging immediately. "What kind of irregularities?" "Budget manipulation. Project cost overruns that were consistently hidden until after quarterly reports. Strategic initiatives that looked successful on paper but had actually hemorrhaged money that was buried in accounting adjustments." Sarah highlighted specific sections of what appeared to be internal Whitmore documents. Nothing illegal, technically, just ethically questionable and deliberately deceptive. Victoria stared at the screen, her expression a mixture of vindication and concern. Why wasn't he formally disciplined? Why just let him leave for another position? Because Whitmore's CEO at the time didn't want the scandal. Daniel was well liked by the board, had powerful allies. Pursuing formal action would have meant admitting they'd promoted someone who'd been manipulating financial data for years. Easier to let him quietly exit and become someone else's problem. "Which is exactly what happened," Ethan said, the pieces clicking together. "He came to Meridian Global with glowing recommendations, no hint of any issues, and positioned himself as the strategic visionary who could take the company to the next level. And when Robert Morrison started making mistakes, Daniel saw his opportunity to claim the CEO position himself." Victoria's voice was cold, analytical. "Except the board chose me instead, which he's never forgiven." Sarah nodded. I have 3 former Whitmore executives willing to speak on background about Daniel's practices there. They won't go public without serious pressure, but their accounts are consistent and detailed. This is real, Victoria. This is leverage. The word hung in the air like a promise and a threat. Leverage meant power, the ability to neutralize Daniel's attacks before they landed, but it also meant descending to his level, using ammunition that could destroy a career and a reputation. Ethan watched Victoria wrestle with the decision, seeing the conflict play out across her face. She'd built her career on integrity and transparency, on being better than the people who'd tried to undermine her. Using this information about Daniel felt like abandoning those principles, even if it was in self-defense. We don't use it yet, Victoria said finally. We hold it in reserve, insurance in case Daniel goes nuclear. But we don't strike first. That's a mistake, Sarah said bluntly. Daniel won't show you the same courtesy. The moment he has something concrete on your relationship with Ethan, he'll weaponize it without hesitation. I know, but I have to be able to live with myself when this is over. I have to know that I didn't become him just to survive him. Victoria's voice was firm despite the fear Ethan could see in her eyes. We defend ourselves when attacked. We don't initiate the destruction. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue but ultimately nodded, respect flickering across her features. Okay, your call, but the moment he makes his move, we respond with everything we have. Agreed. Victoria turned to Ethan. How did Jennifer's external review go? Do we have independent validation of your work quality? The report comes back tomorrow. Jennifer expedited it because she knows we're running out of time. Ethan pulled out his own phone, checking email. But she's confident it'll be strongly positive. Apparently, one of the reviewers has already reached out to ask if I'd be interested in speaking at an industry conference about my methodology. That's good. That helps establish that your career trajectory is merit-based, not favoritism. Victoria's strategic mind was working through scenarios, building defenses even as the walls closed in. What else can we do to strengthen our position before Daniel makes his move? The question sparked something in Ethan's analytical brain, a pattern he'd been sensing but hadn't fully articulated. We need to look at the board, specifically at who Daniel has been cultivating relationships with and why. If he's planning to challenge your leadership, he'll need board support. Understanding his alliances tells us where the attack will come from. Sarah's eyes lit up. That's smart. I can pull board meeting records, track who Daniel's been communicating with, map the relationship networks. It won't tell us his exact plan, but it'll give us early warning about which board members are susceptible to his narrative. Do it, Victoria said. Quietly. I don't want anyone to know we're investigating board dynamics. It'll look paranoid or defensive, and right now we can't afford to seem weak. The meeting continued for another hour, the 3 of them mapping strategies and building contingency plans for various scenarios. By the time Ethan left Victoria's office, his head was spinning with information and implications. The corporate warfare he'd stumbled into was far more complex and dangerous than he'd initially understood. This wasn't just about 2 people trying to have a relationship. It was about power and control, about who got to shape the company's future and who got destroyed in the process. He returned to the analyst floor to find Marcus hovering near his desk, an expression of calculated curiosity on his face. Hey, Brooks, where have you been? Jennifer was looking for you earlier. Ethan kept his expression neutral, hyper-aware that anything he said would likely be reported back to someone. Meeting upstairs, quarter-end analysis. Right, quarter-end. Marcus's tone suggested he didn't quite believe it, but he couldn't prove otherwise. Lot of meetings with executives lately. Must be nice to have that kind of access. The implication was clear. Marcus was still fishing, still building his narrative about inappropriate favoritism. Ethan wanted to snap at him, to defend himself and Victoria against insinuations that had no factual basis. But Jennifer's warnings echoed in his mind, reminding him that engaging would only make things worse. Just doing my job, Ethan said evenly, settling into his chair and opening his email. The dismissal was deliberate, a signal that this conversation was over. Marcus lingered for another moment, then retreated to his own desk, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. Ethan forced himself to focus on his monitor, pulling up spreadsheets and reports as if nothing unusual was happening. But underneath the performance, anxiety churned in his gut. The scrutiny was intensifying, The questions multiplying. How long before someone connected all the dots? How long before speculation became accusation? That evening, Ethan drove to Victoria's apartment again, paranoia making him check his rearview mirror constantly for anyone who might be following. The building's parking garage felt like a small victory, covered, away from street view, offering at least the illusion of privacy. He took the elevator to her floor, hyper-aware of the security cameras tracking his movement, wondering if Daniel already had someone monitoring who visited Victoria after hours. She opened the door before he could knock, pulling him inside with an urgency that spoke to her own heightened anxiety. The apartment felt different tonight, less like a refuge and more like a bunker, a place to hide while the world outside prepared for war. "Sarah sent me the board analysis," Victoria said without greeting, gesturing toward her laptop on the dining table. Charts and diagrams filled the screen, mapping relationships and communication patterns. Daniel's been cultivating 3 specific board members: William Chen, Margaret Torres, and David Atkinson. All 3 have expressed concerns about my strategic direction at various points. Ethan studied the charts, his analyst brain processing the information. That's not enough for a majority vote. He'd need at least 4 board members to force any serious action against you. Which means there's a 4th person he's working on that Sarah hasn't identified yet. Or, Victoria's voice dropped, dread evident in her tone. He's planning something that doesn't require a board vote. Something more immediate and damaging. Like exposing our relationship as evidence of poor judgment. Exactly. If he can create enough scandal, enough doubt about my professionalism and decision-making, the board might feel compelled to act even without his explicit lobbying. Victoria sank into a chair, exhaustion written across her features. "I'm so tired, Ethan. Tired of fighting, tired of defending myself, tired of having to prove that I deserve a position I've more than earned." Ethan moved behind her chair, his hands finding her shoulders and kneading the knots of tension he found there. "Then stop fighting alone. You have me. You have Sarah. You have Jennifer, and probably others you haven't even asked for help yet. Daniel wants you to feel isolated, wants you to believe you're facing this alone. Don't give him that victory." Victoria leaned back into his touch, some of the rigidity leaving her body. What if it's not enough? What if everything we're doing, all the documentation and strategy and defensive preparation, what if it doesn't matter when he finally attacks? Then we adapt. We respond. We find another way forward. Ethan moved around to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands. But we don't surrender before the battle's even started. And we definitely don't let him win by forfeit. She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain, too much weight, too much responsibility for one person to carry. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, that you accepted all of this when you walked into the aquarium. But Ethan, I'm not sure I accepted what this would cost you. Your reputation, your peace, your career potentially. That's not a fair trade for anything I can offer. You're not a transaction. This isn't cost-benefit analysis." Ethan squeezed her hands, willing her to understand. "I'm not here because the benefits outweigh the risks. I'm here because for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm actually living instead of just existing. That's not something you can quantify or trade. It just is." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, and she didn't try to hide them this time. "I don't know how to do this. How to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. How to lead a company while also being human enough to need someone." "You don't have to know. We figure it out together, one day at a time." Ethan wiped her tears with his thumbs, his heart aching at her pain. "That's what this is. 2 people who are really good at their jobs, but maybe not so good at the human parts, trying to figure out how to be both at once." Victoria pulled him up and into her arms, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had become dangerously unstable. They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from simple physical presence while the corporate battlefield waited outside. Later, as they sat together on her couch with reheated pasta neither of them had much appetite for, Victoria's phone buzzed with an email notification. She glanced at the screen and went pale, her fork clattering against her plate. "What is it?" Ethan asked, alarm spiking through him. "Board meeting, emergency session tomorrow at 4 p.m. Victoria's voice was hollow, shocked. The agenda is leadership review and organizational concerns. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. This was it. Daniel's attack, coming faster and harder than they'd anticipated. An emergency board meeting about leadership meant serious accusations had been made, evidence presented, pressure applied. This wasn't reconnaissance anymore. This was the declaration of war. What do we do? Ethan heard the slight tremor in his own voice and hated it. Victoria's expression hardened, the CEO reasserting herself over the vulnerable woman. We prepare. Sarah will need to brief me on everything we know about Daniel's board relationships. I'll need talking points, defense strategies, evidence of successful leadership. She was already moving, grabbing her laptop and pulling up documents. And we need to decide whether to proactively address the relationship question or wait for them to raise it. Victoria. Ethan caught her hand, stopping her frantic preparation. What's the worst-case scenario here? She met his eyes, and he saw real fear beneath her strategic focus. Worst case? The board loses confidence in my leadership. They request my resignation or demote me back to COO. Daniel gets promoted to CEO, and his first action is to eliminate anyone he sees as loyal to me, which would include you. So we both lose our jobs and our reputations. In this industry, being pushed out under scandal follows you. Future employers ask questions, do background checks, talk to former colleagues. We'd both be marked as liabilities. Victoria's voice was clinical, detached, as if she were analyzing someone else's situation. We'd survive, obviously, find other work eventually, probably outside this industry, but everything we've built here would be gone. Ethan absorbed the information, his mind working through implications. This was the reality they'd been dancing around. Total professional destruction is the price of choosing each other. The safe choice was obvious. End the relationship immediately. Let Victoria claim it was a brief mistake in judgment. Give the board enough contrition to accept without demanding her resignation. The safe choice felt like death. We fight, Ethan said, surprised by the certainty in his voice. We go into that board meeting with everything we have. Your performance record, my external validation, Sarah's research on Daniel. We defend ourselves and each other, and we make them see that this relationship doesn't diminish either of our professional capabilities. Ethan, they might not care about capability. They might only care about propriety and appearances and protecting the company from scandal. Then we make them care. We show them that forcing out an exceptional CEO because she dared to have a personal life is a bigger scandal than any relationship could ever be. He was thinking out loud now, strategy forming as he spoke. We control the narrative. We own it before they can use it against us. Victoria stared at him like he'd suggested something impossible. You want to tell the board about us? Voluntarily? I want to remove Daniel's ammunition. If we disclose the relationship ourselves, frame it as two professionals who connected and are handling it responsibly, then he can't use it as evidence of deception or poor judgment. We're being transparent, mature, aware of potential conflicts, and actively managing them. That's incredibly risky. Everything's risky at this point. At least this way we're controlling the revelation instead of having it used as a weapon. Ethan could see the logic crystallizing, the strategic advantage of preemptive transparency. Daniel's counting on this being a secret he can expose. What if it's not a secret? What if it's just a fact we've been managing professionally? Victoria's expression shifted as she processed the idea, her strategic mind engaging with the possibility. We'd need to present it perfectly, frame it as mature adults who are aware of potential complications and have implemented boundaries to prevent any actual conflict of interest, which is exactly what we've been doing. Jennifer's documentation, the external review, the professional distance, all of that supports the narrative that we're handling this responsibly. Sarah would need to help craft the message. Make sure we're hitting the right notes. Transparency without apologizing. Acknowledgement of concerns without accepting that we've done anything wrong. Victoria was pacing now, energy returning as strategy replaced despair. And we'd need to time it perfectly. Too early, and we give Daniel time to reframe it. Too late, and it looks reactive. What if we tell them at the start of the meeting, before Daniel can make his accusations we disclose voluntarily? Shows good faith, demonstrates that we have nothing to hide. Victoria stopped pacing, turning to face him fully. That could work. It robs him of his big reveal, makes him look petty if he tries to attack us anyway. Hope flickered in her expression, fragile but real. But Ethan, if we do this, if we stand up in front of the board and claim this relationship publicly, there's no going back. We're committed, publicly and permanently. I know. And he did, with complete clarity. I'm ready for that. The question is whether you are. Victoria crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. I've never been more terrified of anything in my entire life. But yes, I'm ready. If we're going down, we go down fighting, together. They spent the rest of the night preparing, calling Sarah to bring her into the strategy, crafting the exact language Victoria would use to disclose the relationship to the board. By the time Ethan finally left her apartment near 2 in the morning, they had a plan. Risky and bold and potentially catastrophic, but at least it was theirs. Friday morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through Ethan's windows like the universe was mocking his exhaustion and anxiety. He'd managed perhaps 3 hours of sleep, his mind too active to fully shut down. The external review of his work was due today, and the board meeting loomed at 4 p.m. like an execution date. Jennifer's email arrived at 7:30, marked urgent. External review is excellent. All 3 reviewers validated your methodology and conclusions. One called it innovative and rigorous, representing the cutting edge of predictive analytics. I'm distributing the report to relevant executives this morning. This helps us significantly. Ethan felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. At least that piece was in place. Independent validation that his work quality wasn't dependent on executive favoritism. It wouldn't prevent all accusations, but it made them harder to sustain. At 9, Victoria sent a group text to him, Sarah, and Jennifer. Board meeting at 4 p.m. Emergency session called by Daniel Cross regarding leadership concerns. We're disclosing the relationship at the start, controlling the narrative before he can weaponize it. Need all documentation and support ready. Jennifer's response came immediately. Understood. I'll prepare statement about Ethan's performance and the external review results. This is the right call. Sarah's message followed. Board member breakdown 7 total. We have confirmed support from 2, likely support from 2 more. The remaining 3 are cross-allies or uncommitted. This will be close. The reality of what they were about to do hit Ethan with renewed force. In 7 hours, Victoria would stand in front of the board of directors and essentially announce that she was romantically involved with a junior analyst. No matter how well they framed it, no matter how much documentation they provided, it would be shocking and controversial. And Daniel Cross would be sitting there, ready to exploit any weakness in their defense. The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to focus on work, but concentration was impossible. Every email notification made his heart jump. Every sound from the corridor triggered a spike of adrenaline. Marcus kept glancing his direction with poorly concealed curiosity, clearly sensing that something significant was happening, but unable to determine what. At noon, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. I'm terrified. He typed back immediately. Me too, but we're doing the right thing. What if they don't see it that way? What if disclosure makes it worse? Then at least we tried. At least we didn't let fear make our decisions for us. A long pause, then, I love you. The word stopped Ethan's heart. They hadn't said that yet, hadn't crossed that particular line despite everything else they'd shared. The timing was terrible, hours before a board meeting that could destroy both their careers, but somehow also perfect. Because if they were going to fight for this relationship publicly, they should at least name what they were fighting for. I love you too, he typed, his hands shaking slightly. Whatever happens today, that doesn't change. No, Victoria confirmed. It doesn't. At 3:30, Sarah texted the group. Board members arriving. Daniel looks confident. This is going to be brutal. Ethan stared at his monitor, unseeing. Victoria was about to walk into the most important meeting of her career, and there was nothing he could do to help or protect her. The helplessness was almost unbearable. At 3:55, his phone rang, Victoria's name on the screen. I'm about to go in, she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. I needed to hear your voice one more time before... You're going to be brilliant, Ethan interrupted. Strong and honest and clear. They'll see what I see, someone who's exceptional at her job and also brave enough to be human. And if they don't? Then we figure out what comes next. Together. But don't go into that room expecting to lose. Go in expecting to win. Victoria's laugh was shaky but genuine. When did you become the optimistic one? About 5 days ago. I'm still getting used to it. I have to go. Sarah's signaling that everyone's in position. Victoria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Thank you, Ethan, for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me believe that being human doesn't mean being weak. You were never weak. You just needed someone to remind you that you're allowed to be both powerful and vulnerable. I love you. I love you too. Now go show them why they chose you as CEO. The line went dead, and Ethan sat alone at his desk, staring at his phone. Somewhere in this building, Victoria was walking into a conference room where 7 board members waited to judge her leadership and her choices. Daniel Cross would be there, ready to attack, armed with suspicions and insinuations and carefully constructed doubts. But Victoria wouldn't be defenseless. She had documentation and strategy, truth and transparency. She had allies who believed in her capabilities and evidence that her leadership had transformed the company. And she had something Daniel didn't understand or value: the courage to be vulnerable while remaining strong, to acknowledge her humanity while maintaining her authority. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. 4:15, 4:30, 4:45. Ethan tried to work, to distract himself, but gave up and simply sat at his desk waiting for some signal that the world hadn't ended. At 5:20, his phone buzzed. Sarah's message appeared. It's not going well. Daniel came prepared. She needs help. Ethan's blood went cold. What kind of help? What could he possibly do from the analyst floor while Victoria faced the board alone? Another message from Sarah. He has photos, you and Victoria together outside her apartment building, time-stamped for multiple dates. The room tilted sickeningly. Photos meant evidence, proof that couldn't be explained away as baseless accusation. Daniel hadn't been guessing or fishing. He'd had actual surveillance, documentation of their relationship that made Victoria's planned disclosure look reactive rather than proactive. What do I do? Ethan typed frantically. Get up here. 18th floor executive conference room. Now. She's asking for you. Ethan stood on shaking legs, grabbing his phone and leaving everything else behind. The analyst's floor blurred around him as he headed for the elevators, aware of curious stares but not caring anymore. If Daniel had photos, the secrecy was already over. The only question now was whether they'd survive the exposure. The elevator ride to the 18th floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, Sarah was waiting in the corridor, her expression grim. They're taking a 10-minute recess, she said quickly. Daniel presented the photos halfway through Victoria's disclosure, made it look like she was only coming clean because she'd been caught. The board is furious. They feel deceived and manipulated. Where is she? Women's restroom. Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. She's not handling this well. I've never seen her like this. Ethan's heart clenched painfully. I need to see her. I know. That's why I texted you. But Ethan, when you go back in that room with her, you're making yourself part of this. Daniel will attack you directly, question your motives, try to paint you as opportunistic. Are you ready for that? Yes. He didn't hesitate. Victoria needed him, and nothing else mattered. Sarah nodded, respect flickering across her features despite the disaster unfolding. Okay. Conference room B, around the corner. I'll give you 2 minutes, then we need to go back in. Ethan found Victoria in the small conference room, standing at the window with her arms wrapped around herself. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red, makeup smudged. When she turned and saw him, something in her expression broke and reformed simultaneously. He had photos, she said, her voice hollow. Multiple dates, both of us clearly visible. He's been having us surveilled for at least a week. Ethan crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. I know, Sarah told me. I tried to control the narrative, tried to be transparent and proactive, and he destroyed it. Made me look like I was lying, trying to get ahead of being caught. Victoria's voice was thick with tears and fury. The board thinks I'm deceptive, unprofessional, exactly what Daniel's been saying all along. Then we change their minds. We go back in there and we fight. Ethan, they're going to ask me to resign. I can see it in their faces. They've already decided. The only question is whether they do it publicly or give me the option to step down quietly. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, but he forced himself to stay focused, to be the steady presence Victoria needed. Then we make them reconsider. We show them evidence of your leadership, the company's performance, everything you've accomplished. We make them see that forcing out an exceptional CEO over a relationship is insane. Victoria pulled back enough to look at him, pain and love warring in her expression. You shouldn't be here. You should distance yourself, protect your own career. If you go into that boardroom with me, Daniel will destroy you too. I'm already in this. The moment those photos were taken, I became part of the story. I'd rather face it with you than hide while you fight alone. But your career doesn't matter more than you do. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to hold his gaze. I love you. I'm choosing you. Whatever the board decides, whatever happens to our careers, we face it together. That's not negotiable. Victoria's tears spilled over again, but this time they seemed different. Less despair, more catharsis. Okay, she whispered. Together. Sarah appeared in the doorway. They're reconvening. Victoria, they want you back, and... She glanced at Ethan. They want to speak with Mr. Brooks as well. This was it. The moment when everything became public and permanent. Ethan took Victoria's hand, their fingers interlacing, and together they walked toward the executive conference room where 7 board members and Daniel Cross waited to determine their fate. The conference room was intimidating. Massive table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic city view. The 7 board members sat along one side, their expressions ranging from concern to openly hostile. Daniel sat at the far end, his face carefully neutral, but Ethan could see satisfaction in his eyes. Victoria squared her shoulders, CEO authority reasserting itself despite her tear-stained face. Thank you for agreeing to hear us. I know the circumstances are unconventional, but I want to be completely transparent about what's happened and why. William Chen, the board chairman, gestured toward the empty chairs facing the board. Please sit, both of you. They sat, still holding hands, the gesture both defiant and vulnerable. Ethan could feel 7 pairs of eyes assessing them, judging, forming conclusions that would determine everything. Ms. Hale, Chen began, his voice grave, Mr. Cross has presented evidence of an ongoing romantic relationship between you and Mr. Brooks, a financial analyst several levels below you in the organizational hierarchy. This relationship appears to have been actively concealed from the board and executive leadership. Can you confirm the accuracy of these allegations? Victoria lifted her chin, meeting Chen's eyes directly. Yes, Ethan and I have been seeing each other for approximately 10 days. The relationship is real, consensual, and we have been actively managing potential conflicts of interest through documentation, professional boundaries, and third-party validation of work quality. 10 days, Margaret Torres repeated, her voice sharp. And in that time, you didn't think to disclose this to the board? To your executive team? We were in the process of developing an appropriate disclosure strategy when this meeting was called, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the hostile atmosphere. We planned to be transparent once we'd established clear boundaries and protections. Or once you'd been caught, Daniel interjected smoothly. Forgive me, Victoria, but the timing of your planned disclosure seems remarkably convenient, right after I called this meeting. Ethan felt Victoria's hand tighten around his, but her voice remained calm. Actually, Daniel, the documentation we've been building predates your meeting request by several days. Jennifer Lai, our VP of Finance, can confirm that she's been helping establish independent validation of Mr. Brooks's work quality. We have external reviews, performance documentation, and clear protocols to ensure no actual favoritism occurs. But you have been showing him favoritism, David Atkinson said, his tone accusatory. Direct requests for his analysis, personal meetings, attention that other analysts at his level don't receive. I requested Mr. Brooks's analysis because his forecasting accuracy is exceptional, 19% above our other senior analysts. His methodology represents innovative approaches that benefit the company. Victoria's CEO voice was fully engaged now, authoritative and data-driven. Any attention he's received has been based on merit, not personal favoritism. The external review completed today confirms this. Chen held up a hand, stopping the cross-examination. Ms. Hale, I appreciate your defense of Mr. Brooks's capabilities, but that's not really the issue here. The issue is whether you exercised appropriate judgment in pursuing a romantic relationship with a subordinate employee and whether that relationship compromises your ability to lead this organization effectively. The words hung in the air, the fundamental question that would determine everything. Victoria took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried conviction that came from somewhere deeper than professional training. My judgment in choosing to pursue this relationship was based on recognizing something real and meaningful in my personal life. My judgment in how I've managed that relationship has been professional, documented, and designed specifically to prevent any actual conflict of interest. Are those two things in tension? Yes. Is that tension manageable? Also, yes. Does it compromise my ability to lead Meridian Global? Absolutely not. With respect, Ms. Hale, that's your assessment, Torres said. But the board has to consider appearances and organizational morale. What message does it send when the CEO is romantically involved with a junior analyst? How does that affect other employees' perception of fairness and meritocracy? Before Victoria could respond, Ethan found himself speaking, his voice steadier than he'd expected. With respect, ma'am, I think it sends the message that executives are human beings with personal lives, not machines programmed only for corporate success. Victoria is the most dedicated, ethical leader I've ever encountered. The fact that she's also brave enough to pursue meaningful connection doesn't diminish her professional capabilities. It makes her more complete, more balanced, more effective. Daniel laughed, the sound calculated and dismissive. Mr. Brooks, I appreciate your defense of Ms. Hale, but surely you can see how this looks from an objective perspective. A junior analyst developing a relationship with the CEO, receiving special attention and career opportunities. That's the textbook definition of a conflict of interest. Except my career opportunities have been based on documented performance, Ethan shot back, anger giving him courage. The external review you can't dispute. The forecasting accuracy you can't explain away. I've earned every opportunity I've received, and the relationship with Victoria doesn't change that fact. But it creates the appearance of impropriety, Chen said, his voice heavy with regret. And in corporate governance, appearance often matters as much as reality. Victoria stood abruptly, drawing all attention back to her. Then let me be absolutely clear about the reality. I am an exceptional CEO. Under my leadership, Meridian Global has achieved record revenue, improved operational efficiency, and successfully expanded into new markets. Those are facts, not opinions. My personal relationship with Ethan doesn't change any of that performance data. She moved to the display screen, pulling up documents from her tablet. Here's our growth trajectory over the last 18 months. Here's our market position relative to competitors. Here's employee satisfaction data. Here's successful strategic initiatives. All of this happened under my leadership, and none of it is compromised by the fact that I've developed feelings for someone who happens to work in this organization. The conviction in her voice was powerful, and Ethan could see some of the board members wavering, reconsidering their initial reactions. But Daniel wasn't done. All impressive data, Victoria, but leadership isn't just about quarterly results. It's about judgment and credibility. And the fact remains that you concealed this relationship, developed it in secret, and only disclosed when you were caught. That demonstrates poor judgment at minimum, and potential deception at worst. We weren't concealing, we were being appropriately cautious while we established proper boundaries, Victoria countered, but Ethan could hear the exhaustion creeping into her voice. She'd been fighting for hours, defending herself against attacks that kept shifting and evolving. Chen stood, signaling an end to the discussion. I think we've heard enough for now. Ms. Hale, Mr. Brooks, if you could please step outside while the board deliberates. Victoria and Ethan left the conference room, emerging into the corridor where Sarah waited anxiously. The door closed behind them with a finality that felt ominous. How bad? Sarah asked quietly. Bad, Victoria said, sinking into one of the corridor chairs. They're divided. Some see Daniel's point about judgment and appearances. Others recognize that my performance speaks for itself. But I don't know which way they'll go. They waited in tense silence, minutes stretching into an eternity. Ethan held Victoria's hand, offering what comfort he could through simple physical presence. Sarah paced, her usual composure fractured by stress and fear for her friend. At 6:45, the conference room door opened. Chen emerged, his expression grave. "We'd like to speak with Miss Hale alone, please." Victoria squeezed Ethan's hand once, then released it and stood, walking back into the room with her shoulders squared and her head high. The door closed, separating them, and Ethan was left in the corridor with Sarah and suffocating uncertainty. "What do you think they'll decide?" he asked quietly. Sarah's expression was bleak. "I think they're going to ask her to resign." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, even though he'd known it was possible. Victoria, brilliant, dedicated, exceptional Victoria, forced out of a position she'd more than earned because she dared to be human. "That's not fair." "No," Sarah agreed, "it's not. But corporate governance rarely is. They're protecting the organization from potential scandal, from questions about judgment and propriety. Victoria becomes collateral damage in that protection." 15 minutes passed. 20. 30. Each minute felt like an hour, time distorting under the weight of what was being decided behind that closed door. Finally, at 7:20, the door opened again. Victoria emerged, and one look at her face told Ethan everything he needed to know. She'd been crying again, but beneath the tears was something else. A terrible calm, the acceptance of someone who'd fought as hard as possible and lost anyway. "They gave me a choice," she said, her voice eerily steady. "Resign voluntarily with a generous severance package and positive references, or face a formal review that would likely end in termination with no such benefits." "Victoria," Ethan started, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm resigning, effective immediately. Sarah will step in as interim CEO while they conduct a search for my permanent replacement." Her voice cracked slightly on the word replacement, but she continued. "Daniel abstained from the vote, playing the magnanimous colleague who's above petty politics. The board thanked me for my service and suggested I take time to reflect on appropriate professional boundaries." The clinical recitation of her own destruction was heartbreaking. Ethan pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, the CEO armor finally cracking completely as grief overwhelmed her composure. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. You're going to lose your job too. Daniel will make sure of it." "I don't care about my job." And in that moment, Ethan realized it was true. His career at Meridian Global had never been about ambition or advancement, just safe predictability, comfortable invisibility. Losing it felt less like tragedy and more like liberation from something that had been containing him. Sarah approached tentatively, her own eyes red with unshed tears. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I should have found more on Daniel, should have built better defenses." "You did everything possible," Victoria interrupted, pulling away from Ethan to face her friend. "This isn't your failure. It's not anyone's failure except a corporate structure that can't handle the idea that leaders are human beings with complicated lives." They stood in the corridor for a long moment, three people processing the destruction of everything they'd been fighting for. Then Victoria straightened, wiping her eyes with deliberate gestures. "I need to clear out my office. Sarah, can you help coordinate the transition communications? I want to be gone before Daniel has a chance to gloat." "Of course." Sarah's voice was fierce despite her grief. "And Victoria, for what it's worth, you're the best CEO this company has ever had. They're fools to let you go." Victoria managed a watery smile. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She turned to Ethan, and the love in her eyes was almost unbearable in its intensity. "Walk with me? I don't want to do this alone." "Always," Ethan said, taking her hand again. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And as they walked toward Victoria's office to pack up the career she'd sacrificed for the chance at something real, Ethan realized that despite everything they'd lost, they'd also gained something that couldn't be measured in job titles or quarterly reports. They'd found each other. They'd chosen connection over safety, vulnerability over armor, love over fear. The cost had been catastrophic, but maybe, just maybe, it had also been worth it. Victoria's office felt like a mausoleum as they entered. The space that had represented power and achievement now reduced to just another room that needed to be emptied. The city lights beyond the windows glittered with the same indifference they always had. uncaring about the human dramas playing out in the buildings they illuminated. Ethan watched Victoria move through the space with mechanical efficiency, pulling personal items from drawers and shelves, each object a small monument to a career that had just ended. 18 months, she said quietly, holding a framed photo of the executive team at a company retreat. 18 months as CEO. I thought I'd have years. Thought I'd build something lasting. She set the frame face down in a cardboard box that Sarah had procured from somewhere. Instead, I get a severance package and a polite suggestion to disappear. Ethan wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain etched across her features. But platitudes felt insulting in the face of what she'd lost. Instead, he simply stood beside her, a steady presence while she dismantled the physical evidence of her leadership. Sarah appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, her professional composure barely masking the fury Ethan could see simmering beneath. Transition communications are drafted. I've scheduled an all-hands meeting for Monday morning to announce your departure. The official story is that you're stepping down to pursue other opportunities. The official lie, you mean? Victoria's voice was bitter. Everyone will know the real reason. Corporate euphemisms don't hide forced resignations. No, Sarah admitted. They don't. But they give you some dignity in the exit, for what that's worth. Victoria nodded, returning her attention to the bookshelf where leadership texts and industry publications stood in neat rows. What happens to you now? Will the board make you permanent CEO, or are you just keeping the seat warm for Daniel? They haven't decided, but honestly, I don't want it. Not like this. Not built on your sacrifice. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. You deserved better, Victoria. So much better. Maybe. Or maybe I was naive to think I could have both, the career and the connection, the power and the vulnerability. Victoria pulled books from the shelf with increasing force, anger finally breaking through her controlled facade. Maybe Daniel was right all along. Maybe leaders can't afford to be human. That's not true. Ethan spoke up, unable to stay silent any longer. Daniel's not right. He's just good at exploiting a system that punishes authenticity and rewards performance, but that doesn't make the system correct. Victoria turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. The system won, Ethan. I fought it. We both did. And it destroyed us anyway. How is that not proof that Daniel's approach, cold, calculating, emotionally detached, how is that not the only viable strategy? Because you're still you. Despite losing the title, despite the forced resignation, you're still the person who saw me when I was invisible, who chose connection over safety, who fought for something real even when everyone said it was impossible. Ethan crossed to her, taking the books from her hands and setting them aside. Daniel might have won this battle, but he's still a hollow person living a hollow life. You're not. You never will be. Sarah cleared her throat gently. I'm going to give you two some privacy, but Victoria, before I go, Daniel's not going to get away with this. I'm staying at Meridian Global specifically to make sure of that. The information we found about Whitmore Industries is still valid. When the time is right, the board will learn exactly who they've empowered. Don't. Victoria's voice was sharp, commanding even without the CEO title. Don't sacrifice yourself for revenge. It's not worth it. This isn't revenge. It's accountability. There's a difference. Sarah's expression was fierce, determined. You taught me that leaders have responsibilities beyond their own advancement. One of those responsibilities is making sure toxic people don't destroy good organizations. I'm honoring that lesson. She left before Victoria could argue further, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Victoria sank into her desk chair, soon to be someone else's desk chair, and covered her face with her hands. What do we do now? She asked, her voice muffled and small. I don't know how to be anything other than a CEO. That's been my entire identity for so long. Ethan knelt beside her chair, gently pulling her hands away from her face. Then we figure out who Victoria is when she's not performing a role. Who she is when there's no board to please, no expectations to meet, no corporate structure defining her worth. What if there's nothing there? What if I've been performing for so long that I don't know who I actually am? Then we discover it together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of authentic living at a time. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You're not alone in this, Victoria. You keep forgetting that part. She looked at him with something between desperation and hope. What about you? Your job, your career? Daniel's going to make sure you're pushed out too. Probably, but honestly, I'm not sure I want to stay anyway. This place... He gestured vaguely at the office, the building beyond. It was never really about passion or purpose for me. It was just safe, predictable. A place to hide while I convinced myself that isolation was preferable to risk. And now? Now I want more. I want work that means something beyond quarterly forecasts. I want to use my skills for something that actually matters. The realization was forming as he spoke, clarity emerging from the wreckage of their careers. Maybe losing this job isn't the catastrophe we think it is. Maybe it's an opportunity to build something better. Victoria studied his face, searching for doubt or regret, and apparently finding none. You really mean that? You're not just trying to make me feel better. I really mean it. I spent 5 years being professionally invisible because it was easier than being seen. You changed that. You made me brave enough to want more from life than just safety. Ethan stood, pulling her up with him. So yes, losing Meridian Global hurts, but losing you would have been unbearable. This we can survive. A knock on the door interrupted them. Jennifer Lai stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of sadness and barely controlled anger. I just heard. Victoria, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Jennifer. Victoria's voice was professionally neutral. CEO armor reasserting itself instinctively, even though the title was gone. Don't thank me. This is wrong, and everyone knows it. Jennifer stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. I've been on the phone for the last hour with every executive I trust. There's a lot of anger about how this was handled. A lot of people who think the board made a catastrophic mistake. Anger doesn't change the outcome. No, but it might change what happens next. Jennifer pulled out her phone, showing them something on the screen. I've drafted a letter of support. 23 executives and senior managers have signed it so far, including 3 vice presidents. It states that you've been an exceptional CEO, that your personal life shouldn't negate your professional achievements, and that forcing your resignation sets a dangerous precedent for the entire organization. Victoria stared at the phone, color draining from her face. Jennifer, you can't. Daniel will retaliate. Everyone who signed that will be marked as disloyal. Let him try. We've all documented our positions, our performance records, our value to the company. He can't fire 23 people without destroying organizational functionality. Jennifer's voice was hard, determined. And more importantly, this letter is being copied to every board member. They need to understand that their decision has consequences beyond just losing you. This is corporate suicide for everyone involved. This is standing up for what's right, something you taught a lot of us, whether you realize it or not. Jennifer looked at Ethan. Your external review was extraordinary, by the way. All 3 analysts recommended you for advanced positions, and one mentioned that your skills are being wasted at the junior level. That's not favoritism, that's recognition of genuine excellence. Ethan felt something warm unfurl in his chest despite the surrounding chaos. Thank you for getting that review done. It might not have saved Victoria's position, but at least it established the truth. The truth matters, even when it doesn't immediately win. Jennifer returned her attention to Victoria. I'm also putting together a coalition to oppose any attempt to promote Daniel to permanent CEO. We're not going to make this easy for him. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but this time they seemed different, less grief, more overwhelming gratitude. Why are you all doing this? You're risking everything. Because leadership isn't just about titles and authority. It's about inspiring people to be better than they thought possible. You did that for all of us. Jennifer's voice softened. And because watching someone get destroyed for choosing to be human is something worth fighting against. After Jennifer left, Victoria and Ethan continued packing in contemplative silence. The boxes accumulated slowly. Personal effects, awards and commendations, the physical artifacts of a career that had mattered more to Victoria than she'd fully realized until it was ending. Around 9 p.m., Sarah returned with coffee and sandwiches. Neither of them had the appetite to eat. I've been thinking, Sarah said, settling into one of the guest chairs while Victoria and Ethan took a break from packing. About what comes next for you, both of you. Job hunting, I assume, Victoria said with a tired attempt at humor. Updating resumes, explaining to future employers why my tenure as CEO was so brief. Or you could build something new, something that doesn't require you to fit into someone else's organizational structure. Sarah pulled up something on her tablet. I've been researching consulting firms that specialize in organizational leadership and strategic transformation. Firms started by former executives who left corporate environments to work independently. Victoria's attention sharpened. You're suggesting I become a consultant? I'm suggesting you leverage your expertise without subjecting yourself to corporate politics and boards that prioritize appearance over performance. Sarah turned the tablet so they could see the screen. Look at these firms, all founded by people who had your experience, who got pushed out or chose to leave, who built successful practices helping companies without having to navigate the same toxic dynamics that destroyed your position here. Ethan leaned forward, his analyst brain engaging with the data Sarah was presenting. This could work. Victoria has the credentials, the track record, the expertise that companies would pay premium rates to access. And working independently means no board oversight, no political constraints. It also means no stability, no guaranteed income, no infrastructure. Victoria's voice carried the caution of someone trained to see risks and pitfalls. Building a consulting practice from scratch is incredibly difficult. So is becoming CEO at 41, Sarah countered. You're exceptional at what you do, Victoria. Companies will pay for that expertise, whether it comes with a corporate title or not. And you wouldn't be alone, Ethan added, an idea forming as he spoke. I could help. My analytical skills, your strategic vision, we could build something together. A firm that combines leadership consulting with advanced financial analytics. Victoria looked at him, surprise and something like hope flickering in her expression. You'd do that? Leave traditional employment completely? Take the risk of building something from nothing? I'd do more than that. I'd invest everything I have into making it work. Ethan took her hand, conviction strengthening with each word. We've already lost the safe option. We might as well build something that's actually ours, something that can't be taken away by board politics or corporate maneuvering. Sarah was nodding enthusiastically. This could be powerful, and I have contacts throughout the industry, people who respect Victoria's work, who would be willing to take meetings, consider engagement proposals. You wouldn't be starting from zero. For the first time since the board meeting, Victoria's expression shifted from grief to possibility. We'd need to be smart about it. Careful with positioning, strategic about which opportunities we pursue first. Obviously. But when have you ever been anything other than strategic? Sarah smiled, some of the earlier devastation giving way to cautious optimism. And honestly, watching you build something outside Meridian Global's shadow would be satisfying on multiple levels. Proof that Daniel didn't actually destroy you, just freed you from constraints you didn't need anymore. They talked for another hour, sketching out possibilities and potential approaches. Victoria's strategic mind engaged fully for the first time since the resignation, analyzing markets and opportunities with the same precision she'd brought to running Meridian Global. Ethan contributed analytical frameworks and financial modeling concepts, the conversation flowing with an ease that felt both natural and energizing. By the time they finished packing Victoria's office near midnight, the boxes represented not just an ending, but also the raw materials for a new beginning. Awards and commendations that proved expertise, books and resources that would inform consulting methodologies, artifacts of success that could be leveraged into future achievements. Ethan helped carry boxes down to Victoria's car, the building mostly empty at this late hour. Security guards nodded sympathetically as they passed, word having clearly spread about the CEO's departure. Victoria held her head high, refusing to slink away in shame despite the circumstances of her exit. When the last box was loaded, they stood in the parking garage, surrounded by concrete and fluorescent lights and the distant hum of the city that never fully slept. Victoria looked back at the building that had been her professional home, her face unreadable. I thought I'd feel more devastated, she said quietly, like I should be collapsed in grief or rage or something dramatic. Instead, I just feel lighter, like I've been carrying weight I didn't realize was there until it was removed. Maybe that's what freedom feels like, Ethan suggested, when you're not performing anymore, not constantly managing perceptions and politics. Maybe, Victoria turned to face him fully. I'm terrified, of the uncertainty, the lack of structure, the possibility that we'll fail at building something independent. But I'm also, God help me, I'm excited. For the first time in years, I'm actually excited about what comes next instead of just grimly determined to survive it. Ethan pulled her close, feeling her arms wrap around him with gratitude and trust and love that had somehow survived corporate warfare. We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to build something remarkable. Promise? Promise. They drove separately back to Victoria's apartment, maintaining the habit of caution even though secrecy no longer mattered. But once inside, the relief of privacy and safety dissolved the remaining professional distance between them. Victoria changed into comfortable clothes, washed the tear-stained makeup from her face, and curled up on the couch with Ethan in exhausted silence. What happens Monday? She asked eventually. When the announcement goes out and everyone knows. People talk, speculate, form opinions we can't control. Ethan stroked her hair absently, grounding them both in physical contact. But we're not there anymore. We don't have to care what Meridian Global thinks or says because it's not our world anymore. It feels strange, like I should care more about my reputation there. Your reputation is excellent work over 15 years. One forced resignation doesn't erase that, no matter how Daniel tries to spin it. Ethan shifted to look at her directly. And the people who matter, the ones who actually know your work quality, they'll remember the truth long after the gossip fades. Victoria nodded against his chest, her breathing gradually evening out as exhaustion claimed her. Ethan held her while she slept, his own mind too active to surrender to unconsciousness. The events of the day replayed in fragments: the board meeting, Victoria's devastation, Jennifer's defiant support, Sarah's vision for what came next. All of it swirled together into a chaotic narrative that had no clear resolution yet. His phone buzzed softly with a text message. Jennifer Lai. Executive letter of support is up to 34 signatures now. This is becoming a movement. Board is going to have to respond. Ethan typed back carefully, not wanting to wake Victoria. What kind of response? Unknown, but they can't ignore this level of dissent. Daniel's going to be furious. Let him be furious. We're done playing his games. You might be done, but the game continues. Watch your back, Ethan. He'll come after you next if he hasn't already. The warning was sobering but not surprising. Daniel Cross didn't leave loose ends, and Ethan represented unfinished business, the relationship that had triggered Victoria's downfall, the evidence that her compromised judgment had real-world manifestations. Eliminating Ethan from Meridian Global would complete Daniel's narrative arc, tying up the story in a way that reinforced his position. But Ethan was already mentally checked out, his focus shifting toward the future rather than dwelling on corporate politics he no longer had to navigate. Let Daniel have his hollow victory. Let him claim the CEO position through manipulation and manufactured scandal. None of it would change the fundamental reality. Daniel Cross was building his success on someone else's destruction, and that kind of foundation inevitably crumbled eventually. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies and steady rain, weather that matched the emotional heaviness lingering from Friday's catastrophe. Victoria woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before memory returned and grief crossed her features. But she pushed through it with visible effort, determined not to spend the day wallowing. Coffee, she announced, disentangling herself from Ethan's arms. And then we start planning. If we're really doing this, building something independent, we need strategy and structure and realistic timelines. They spent the day at Victoria's dining table, laptops open, sketching out business models and service offerings. Victoria's strategic expertise combined with Ethan's analytical precision created a compelling framework, a consulting firm that offered integrated leadership development and financial optimization, targeting mid-sized companies looking to scale intelligently. The market research was promising, the competitive landscape manageable, the potential revenue significant if they could secure even a modest client base. Sarah joined them in the afternoon, bringing market contacts and industry insights that refined their approach. The three of them worked with focused intensity, channeling grief and anger into productive action. By evening, they had the skeleton of a business plan, incomplete and rough, but real enough to feel possible. You'll need startup capital, Sarah noted, reviewing their financial projections. At least 6 months of operating expenses before you can realistically expect consistent client revenue. I have savings, Victoria said, and the severance package, which is generous enough to provide runway. I have some savings too, Ethan added. Not much, but enough to contribute. And I can take contract work if necessary, financial modeling for companies that need analytical support but can't justify full-time analysts. Sarah nodded approvingly. Smart. Diversified income streams reduce risk while you build the consulting practice. She paused, then continued with careful deliberation. I could also invest. As a silent partner. Provide additional capital in exchange for small equity stake. Victoria looked up sharply. Sarah, you don't have to do that. This is risky. I know it's risky. I also know you're brilliant and Ethan's talented, and together you could build something genuinely valuable. Sarah's voice was firm, brooking no argument. Besides, I've been looking for investment opportunities outside Meridian Global. Diversification, you know. This makes strategic sense beyond just friendship. You're sure? Completely. Let's talk specific numbers and equity percentages. Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet, and the conversation shifted into concrete financial planning that felt grounding in its specificity. By Sunday evening, they had refined the business plan enough to feel legitimate. Victoria had reached out to 3 former colleagues at other companies, gauging interest in potential consulting engagements. 2 had responded enthusiastically, suggesting meetings to discuss specific needs. It wasn't guaranteed revenue, but it was proof of concept, evidence that Victoria's expertise had value independent of her corporate title. Ethan spent Sunday afternoon drafting his resignation letter from Meridian Global. The words came easily, free of the bitterness or recrimination he might have expected. He was simply an analyst choosing to pursue other opportunities, effective immediately, professional and clean, offering no ammunition for Daniel to weaponize. You don't have to resign yet, Victoria said when he showed her the draft. You could stay, collect a paycheck while we build the business foundation. I could, but I don't want to. Ethan's voice was certain, peaceful even. Every day I stay is a day I'm half committed to something that doesn't matter instead of fully committed to something that does. I'd rather take the risk. Victoria kissed him softly, gratitude and love evident in the gesture. We're really doing this. Walking away from traditional employment, building something from scratch with no guarantees. We really are. It's terrifying. Yes. And also kind of exhilarating. That too. Monday morning, Ethan submitted his resignation electronically, copying Jennifer Lai in HR. The response came within an hour. His resignation was accepted effective immediately. His final paycheck and benefits information would be processed within 2 weeks. His access to company systems was terminated. Just like that, 5 years at Meridian Global ended with bureaucratic efficiency. Jennifer called his cell phone within minutes of the resignation processing. You actually did it. I was hoping you might reconsider. Nothing to reconsider. This is the right choice. Ethan could hear the chaos of the analyst floor in the background, Monday morning scramble amplified by the all-hands meeting about Victoria's departure. How's it going there? Chaotic. Sarah made the announcement about Victoria at 9. Half the company is in shock. The other half already has theories about what really happened. Daniel's giving interviews to anyone who will listen, positioning himself as the steady hand that will guide us through this transition. Let him. His time will come. Maybe sooner than you think. The executive letter of support got leaked to the press over the weekend. Business Journal is running a story this afternoon about internal dissent at Meridian Global, questions about whether the board forced out an effective CEO due to personal bias. Jennifer's voice carried grim satisfaction. Daniel's narrative is already being challenged publicly. Ethan felt a surge of vindication, though he tried to temper it with realism. Good, but we're still gone, and he's still there. That's the bottom line. For now, but corporations are ecosystems, and Daniel just destabilized his. That instability will have consequences. Jennifer paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. Take care of yourself, Ethan, and take care of Victoria. She deserves happiness more than anyone I know. I will. Thank you, Jennifer, for everything. Thank me by building something remarkable. Prove that integrity and authenticity can win, even when it looks like they've lost. The call ended, leaving Ethan alone in Victoria's apartment with the surreal reality of unemployment and unlimited possibility. He opened his laptop and began working on the consulting firm's website, channeling nervous energy into productive action. Victoria spent Monday in meetings with potential clients, her calendar filling rapidly as word spread about her availability. The corporate world moved fast. A departed CEO was quickly repositioned as an available expert. Her forced resignation reframed as an opportunity for companies smart enough to engage her services. By Monday evening, she had 2 signed letters of intent for consulting engagements, both 3-month projects, both paying rates that validated their business model's financial assumptions. The relief on her face when she told Ethan was profound. Tears of gratitude rather than grief this time. "We're going to make this work," she said, showing him the signed documents. "This is real. We're actually building something." Tuesday brought more momentum. Sarah connected them with an attorney who specialized in small business formation, helping them establish the legal structure for their consulting firm. They settled on a name after hours of debate, Meridian Strategies, both an acknowledgement of where they'd come from and a subtle reclamation of territory Daniel thought he'd conquered. Wednesday, the Business Journal article published, and the fallout was immediate. The piece detailed Victoria's forced resignation, the executive letter of support, and growing questions about whether Meridian Global's board had prioritized appearance over performance. Daniel Cross was quoted defending the board's decision, but his responses came across as defensive and calculated. Several industry analysts weighed in, suggesting that losing Victoria Hale represented a significant strategic mistake. Sarah texted them a link to the article, along with a simple message. "The tide is turning. Board meeting scheduled for Friday to address the controversy. Daniel's in trouble." But Victoria's response surprised Ethan. She read the article, absorbed the implications, and then set her phone aside with deliberate finality. "It doesn't matter anymore. Daniel, the board, Meridian Global. That's not our story now. We're building something new, and I don't want to waste energy on what they're doing or feeling. You don't want to see Daniel face consequences? I want him to face consequences. I'm just not going to invest my life in making it happen." Victoria's voice was calm, centered in a way Ethan hadn't heard before. Karma, justice, accountability, those things happen or they don't. But either way, I'm choosing to focus forward rather than backward. The wisdom in her words struck Ethan deeply. This was growth, the kind that came from surviving something devastating and emerging on the other side with clarity about what actually mattered. Thursday afternoon, Jennifer called Victoria directly. "The board wants to talk to you, privately. They're reconsidering the resignation." Victoria put the call on speaker so Ethan could hear. "Reconsidering how?" "They want to offer you the CEO position back. Full reinstatement, public acknowledgement that the resignation was hasty, commitment to supporting your leadership moving forward." Jennifer's voice was cautious, uncertain of how this news would land. Apparently, the public backlash and internal dissent has them worried about long-term damage to the company's reputation. Silence stretched across the connection. Ethan watched Victoria process the information, emotions flickering across her face, surprise, vindication, anger, and something that looked like weary amusement. "Tell them no," she said finally. Victoria, "Tell them no," she repeated, voice firm. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to an environment where I'd constantly be proving my worth, managing board anxieties, navigating politics that have nothing to do with actual performance. I'm building something better." "Are you sure? This is the CEO position we fought so hard to protect." "I'm sure. The fight isn't worth winning anymore. I'd rather build something where I don't have to fight at all." Victoria glanced at Ethan, and he saw peace in her expression, genuine, hard-won peace. "Wish them well for me, and tell them to be careful with Daniel. He's more dangerous than they realize." After Jennifer hung up, promising to deliver the message, Victoria turned to Ethan with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I just turned down a CEO position. A week ago, that would have been unthinkable. Today, it feels like the most obvious decision I've ever made. No regrets?" "None. Well, maybe one. I regret not doing this sooner. not having the courage to walk away from toxicity before it forced me out. She moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. But I'm grateful for the push. Sometimes we need to lose everything we thought mattered to discover what actually does. Friday brought news that Daniel Cross had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into his conduct and past performance. The Whitmore Industries information had apparently surfaced, whether through Sarah's contacts or other channels. Ethan wasn't sure and didn't ask. But the result was clear. Daniel's narrative had collapsed, his credibility shattered by revelations about manipulated financial data and questionable ethical practices. Victoria read the news with quiet satisfaction, but no triumph. He destroyed himself. I didn't have to do anything except step out of the way and let his own toxicity catch up with him. By the end of their second week outside Meridian Global, Victoria and Ethan had secured 4 consulting clients, established Meridian Strategies as a legal entity, and developed a rhythm of working together that felt both productive and joyful. They converted Victoria's dining room into a shared office space, their laptops side by side, collaboration flowing naturally between strategic vision and analytical implementation. The work was demanding, the hours long, the pressure of building a business from scratch relentless. But it was also theirs in a way corporate employment had never been. Every decision made freely, every success earned without political maneuvering, every challenge faced as partners rather than employees navigating hierarchical constraints. 3 weeks after Victoria's resignation, they took their first real break, a weekend trip to a cabin in the mountains, away from city noise and corporate memories. They hiked through forests turning gold with autumn, cooked simple meals together, and talked about futures that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or board meetings. On Saturday evening, sitting on the cabin's porch while sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, Victoria turned to Ethan with an expression of wonder. "I'm happy. Actually genuinely happy in a way I'm not sure I've ever been. Is that strange? To find happiness in the wreckage of everything I thought defined me? Not strange. Maybe just honest. Maybe you're finally living instead of performing." Ethan took her hand, their fingers interlacing with familiar ease. "And for what it's worth, I'm happy too. Happier than I knew was possible when I was hiding in spreadsheets and avoiding connection. We make quite a pair, the invisible analyst and the deposed CEO, building something from nothing." "Building something from truth," Ethan corrected. "From choosing each other over safety, vulnerability over armor, authenticity over performance. That's not nothing. That's everything." Victoria leaned over to kiss him, and the gesture carried weight beyond simple affection, gratitude and promise, acknowledgement of everything they'd survived and everything they were building together. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling despite the gathering darkness, Ethan felt certainty settle into his bones. This was the life they were supposed to be living. Not safe or predictable or constrained by other people's expectations, but real and challenging and entirely theirs. "I love you," Victoria said softly. "Thank you for seeing me, for not running when everything fell apart, for choosing this chaos with me." "I love you too, and honestly the chaos is better than the alternative. At least it's interesting," Ethan grinned. "Besides, somebody had to make you realize that being CEO wasn't the most important thing you'd ever accomplish." "Oh? And what is?" "Building a life that's actually worth living, creating something that matters beyond quarterly reports. Proving that connection and integrity aren't weaknesses, they're the only thing strong enough to build on." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and free in the mountain air. "When did you become so wise?" "About 3 weeks ago. Right around the time I stopped hiding and started living." They sat together as darkness claimed the sky, stars emerging one by one in the vast expanse above them. The city, with its corporate towers and political warfare, its titles and hierarchies and endless performance, felt impossibly distant. Out here, they were just 2 people who'd found each other in the middle of chaos and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Building a business required relentless work and constant adaptation. Financial uncertainty would be their companion for the foreseeable future. And the corporate world they'd left behind would continue spinning its narratives, some true and some deliberately false. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth Ethan had discovered in a glass-walled conference room 3 weeks ago. Being seen was better than being safe, connection was stronger than armor, and choosing love over fear was the bravest thing anyone could do. Victoria rested her head on his shoulder, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her, holding tight to the woman who'd changed everything. They'd lost job titles and corporate prestige, security and predictability. But they'd gained something infinitely more valuable, each other and the freedom to build a future on their own terms. As the stars multiplied overhead and the mountain night wrapped around them in comfortable darkness, Ethan realized that this moment was the real victory. Not defeating Daniel Cross or reclaiming corporate positions, but sitting here with Victoria, peaceful and present, and finally, genuinely free. They'd started with a whisper in an empty office, two lonely people recognizing something true in each other. They'd fought through corporate warfare and forced resignations, through public scandal and devastating loss. And they'd emerged on the other side not broken, but transformed. Stronger individually and unshakable together. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging and full of possibility. But whatever came next, they would face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together, honest, and brave enough to choose connection over every safer alternative. And really, Ethan thought, as Victoria's breathing evened into sleep against his shoulder, what more could anyone ask from life than that? The city would still be there when they returned, with all its complications and demands. Meridian strategies would need their attention. Clients would require their expertise. Bills would demand payment. The practical realities of building a life outside corporate safety nets would assert themselves soon enough. But tonight, just for tonight, they could simply be. Two people who'd risked everything for something real, who'd survived the consequences, and who'd discovered that the wreckage of their old lives contained exactly the materials they needed to build something better. The stars kept their silent watch, the mountains stood eternal in the darkness, and Victoria and Ethan held each other close, proof that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was choose love over fear, truth over performance, and the terrifying freedom of being fully seen over the hollow safety of remaining invisible. And that choice, that single, brave, impossible choice made in a moment of connection, had changed everything.